Hello and welcome to CANNAMAntv. My name is Connor McLeod, and in this interview, I have the pleasure of speaking with molecular biologist, Chief Scientific Officer at Pharma and Chair of the Cannabis Industry Council's Plant Science Group, Dr. Gary Yates. In this interview, we discuss Gary's academic background and what led him to the cannabis space, phytochemical interaction and the impact this can have physiologically, what's necessary to establish a progressive cannabis industry in the UK, Gary's musical background and his new album, The Godstar Paradox, the creative process and the metaphysical foundation of this process, and genetic sequencing and the dangers of genetic patents. Make sure to like and subscribe, and join me on Patreon, where you can help to build a stronger cannabis media platform for £3 a month. Now then, let's talk cannabis. For people that are unaware of your work, how did you get to where you're at, and then what's your academic background?
Aye, so So I started off studying genetics at Glasgow, 2008, I think it was. And then I attained a preference to plants throughout that. I studied genetics, you study all organisms, which gave you a really fascinating perspective on life, because the similarities and the differences that was the kind of essentially what we're studying. And but I had a tendency to just always drift towards plants. Had a little bit of green thumbs growing up with my granddad, who was he did that for a living for many years and was an avid gardener of all sorts of, vegetables and fruits and flowers and things like that. So that was kind of in my DNA growing up. But I studied genetics, drifted towards plants. Actually ended up publishing a paper as an undergraduate, which is quite a rare thing, due to my final year project, which was a bit of luck, but also a lot of hard work.
Yeah. What was the paper?
Sorry?
What was the paper?
It has this really long title, and it was so long ago, but it was something to do with viral DNA and signaling within the plant. So I played such a small part in it, I didn't really contribute much to the writing of it or anything like that. It was just I'd done a kind of few experiments that proved the point, and it kind of proved the hypothesis, I guess, and came up with a wee test to show the impact of it. So that was cool. It just gave me a real wow, I want to do this. You're treading on new ground that no one's ever done before, and it's I just got a taste for that. It was there was a rush in there, and through that interaction, that lab, I ended up getting introduced to another lab, and they had a PhD place, which I went to down in Durham University, the 4-year PhD there, which was again another fascinating, eye opener, because this time, instead of studying genetics and kind of DNA and gene function, it was much more disease and pathogen interactions, and then the kind of signaling mechanisms within that, and protein modification. There was a lot more biochemistry heavy as well. So it kind of gave me a different flavour of things, but it was also really, really interesting, because one of the things that we did was we had to reconstruct entire pathways that happen in the plant in the test tube, just using the enzymes, so you would have to clone the gene, express the protein, purify the protein, do that for all of the different enzymes, then put them in the right mix with the right, components in the substrate, and then kind of pray to the science gods that something happens. And and every now and again it does, and it's just amazing. The readouts can be quite boring, it's just like a line on a kind of blank sheet of paper almost, but when that line comes up, man, again, it's another kind of a real rush. So
I bet in real time, that's like the adrenaline for the scientist.
Exactly. So did the PhD there. Again, got quite lucky, got quite a few publications out of that. Went to a postdoc after that, essentially, after I finished my thesis down in York, where I was focused on, at this time we switched to algae, and we were focused on photosynthesis. There's a type of algae that can concentrate its carbon around the site of photosynthesis. So when it's in a low carbon environment, it can essentially function as normal. So we're trying to back engineer that system, and it's quite a new field of study. And that was just, again, another fascinating journey, and seeing something else. And this time, I was working on entire plants before, and now I'm working on a single cell organism which basically functions as an entire plant almost. Obviously that's a bit of a stretch, but I mean, in a sense it does. It photosynthesizes, it produces sugars, and it absorbs carbon dioxide. It's the same kind of process essentially from abroad.
Which in a sense is absolutely mind-blowing, Gary, when you think about if it was a single cell, how on earth can it represent such a wide spectrum of behaviour?
Yeah, exactly. Which again, and then you're looking down a microscope at these millions upon millions of them, in a tiny wee droplet, and it's just like, wow, which one will I pick to take a picture of today?
Yeah.
And that was another thing we did a lot there, was that we focus a lot on how to see things in the molecular world. So a lot of protein tagging. So when you go and image it under certain types of microscopes, which essentially now the light, the wavelength of white light is obviously limited by, a microscope can only go so far just with white light. So they use lasers and different things to really focus in on. And there's all sorts of different variations, like refraction and even radiation scattering to see things that are really, really small. And it's just so fascinating, the technology. All the physicists develop that stuff, and then the biologists apply, bioluminescent markers for the molecular tagging side of things, and then you can see them under the microscope in the organisms when you shoot them with a laser.
Yeah.
Again, so that sometimes you've cloned the gene and you've tagged it with a marker, and then you're putting it in the algae, and then you're looking at the microscope to see if it's glowing, and then where is it glowing? That's really the thing that you're trying to discover. So it's called protein localization, trying to figure out where the protein is when it's expressed, when it ends up going. And yeah, it's just brilliant stuff. And then, so where am I now? York. So from there, basically, I can't even remember how it really happened. It was one of those weird synergies, and I got speaking with some guy on was it LinkedIn about applying for a job as a breeder or scientist for a cannabis company. And I was like, what? To be honest with you, when was this? 2020. Yeah, I wasn't even aware cannabis was legal in any sense in the UK. Right. I'd kind of I was like, is it kind of you can get it, but you have to do it under strict control in a certain place. I thought it was, I had no idea. I'd never really looked into that aspect of it.
Right.
Because especially between I'm also a musician, so during that postdoc I was also doing an album,
right.
and my time was just I wasn't looking, I wasn't reading anything beyond what I had to do for work, and then making music at night, and that was it. That was my routine. I was just in that groove,
Yeah. That sounds pretty cool, man. We'll have to talk about that in a sec. Definitely.
And then obviously COVID and stuff happened, and it shook everything up, and one thing led to another, and I was no longer comfortable in that in that role that I was at, and things developed in that with this conversation, and then it turned into an interview, and before I knew it, I was like, well, I'm going to go do this, and then I was working for Pharma, which is a UK based company, which is a global genetic supplier.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. But obviously we can bring seeds in and out of the country legally.
Yeah.
And that's we've got a license to do so, and that's what we use to do it. So is that, again, that's a crazy journey, because I worked in sales years ago, and some of these sales, I've been talking to people for 18, 24 months,
yeah.
and there's no sale yet, but it's happening, because people are waiting on licenses, and they're waiting on authorizations and scaling up and fundraising and all sorts of things that you've probably heard about, especially associated with the UK side of the industry. And that's basically what my focus became next, was where is cannabis science at? The thought, all of a sudden, applying all that academic know-how into cannabis, as growing up in West Central Scotland, you're very familiar with cannabis by age 16. So and that's not. I'm not advocating that that's a good thing, but I'm just saying
it's just a reality. Let's be honest.
It's just there.
Yeah.
So it was just like, wow, what an opportunity. And, actually one of the things that inspired me to study genetics, I should have said, was like I was kind of like a musician, just floating about, doing like part-time jobs here and there, but trying to be a musician, and but not really trying in the right ways looking back on it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But anyway, so I was kind of professional musician for 2 years, but it was kind of like patchy, there's always other jobs to support you in times of not much happening. So where was I going with that again?
The
Yeah, so
2020.
yeah. We went to me and a friend of mine went to Amsterdam. We had a very I just had a very good experience there that made me realize that I was not really applying myself in the ways that I should be, and that I was actually lying to myself in a lot of ways about what I was actually capable of.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like oh, I'm fooling everyone. It was just like you're sometimes just scared to try things because you're scared to actually succeed at things.
Yeah.
And it kind of broke my ego in a way that it was just like, yeah, this realization that just go and try stuff and just be in your own lane and don't even look at what anybody else is doing. And
Yeah.
so I was like, okay, like what do you want to do? And I was reading New Scientist quite regularly, and I was like, genetics, that's where it's at. We were just entering the kind of human genome era, like that was really starting to turn. And I just thought, what a time to be involved in a really innovative age,
Yeah.
in bioscience. Because by the modern biology, the modern molecular biology and genetics, it's very young, and our understanding of it. So and even now that we can sequence and we understand gene function to a certain extent, like that was really, like my supervisor during my PhD, his entire PhD was to clone a gene or two, which was, where the technology was then.
Mm-hmm.
And now we can do entire genomes in a couple of hours,
Yeah.
essentially, on a desktop thing. Yeah. So it's went so quickly, and the cost of it's came right down, which is really good for like, cannabis genetic development as well, because with so much polyhybridization that's went on with just the same genetics just being crossed and then kind of phenohunted out and then crossed back in with something else over and over. It's I don't know. It's a lot of good things have come from it. I mean, don't get me wrong, but it's a wee bit
Tunnel vision.
Sorry.
It's produced tunnel vision, really, for a genetic lineage,
Yeah,
really.
that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, and there's a lot more to explore, I would imagine, if we can, if we can really access it. I mean, that said, I think when we apply this technology, is happening now. On the scale of it's getting quite big now. Over the last couple of years, I've seen it going from not many people was that. There's the odd company doing it, but like I'm talking about the kind of like the guys that we all know, and from the old seed breeders from long times ago that are you know everybody's turning their hand to this kind of looking over the fence at molecular breeding, and and it's also good for like biomarkering, like making sure that, oh, that's my genetic and I know it because I've got the DNA sequenced, and if you rip it off, I can prove it.
Right.
But that's not actually taken as big a foothold as you might think. But I think it will do as more and more sequencing gets done, and more we understand about how the gene and how the DNA is actually correlating to what the plant does. Because jumping about a bit in my story, but that was the kind of one of the epiphanies, is I was really curious to think, how can this plant produce these substances that no other plant does? At the time I was naive, like I just thought blanket it was completely different chemicals, or we just thought it was THC and that was it. We never heard of terpenes back in those days. And this is like, when was this, 2002, something like that. And so yeah, that was the kind of epiphany. There must be something in the genetics that tells you what that is. And then that was one of the things that spurred me into genetics, essentially, was that, that. And then it kind of, that faded really quick when I really started looking at genetics and all the other exciting stuff that was going on. But it was one of the kind of moments that was, there must be something in the genetics to do with that. And yeah, so anyway, so that's part of this, the kind of, the original story. which I just think is worth mentioning. It happened in Amsterdam, and it was just a kind of a moment when I just had that thought, and and onward and upward for there. So yeah, and now, so coming into the industry 2.5 years ago now, I felt like, yeah, like, okay, we're going to get our teeth into this and like really go deep. It's going to take months to go through the plant. Like, there's lots of stuff on cannabis and cannabinoid and interactions and like biosynthesis pathways, but I was talking about the plant. Like studies on the plant. The plant's behavior, the plant's gene function. All that kind of stuff. And there wasn't a lot. There really, that's. I think you were saying you're reading that article. I think I mentioned it. There just wasn't a whole lot there to consume. And when I was quite surprised, actually, it didn't take that long to get up to kind of speed on it. But anyway, at that time, there wasn't a whole lot being done in terms of sequencing and stuff, and like phylos. I don't know if you know the phylos bioscience story.
Oh wait, yeah. I think is that when they give the 3D version of where the lineage comes from? Is that right?
Yeah, exactly, man. So there's really good work. They use X amount of markers in the genes to show relatedness, and then they map it all out visually, and you can see how closely related things are essentially. And that's great, and that's a good bit of work, but it's not deep sequencing in terms of like, we understand what all these genes are doing and all these different variations, of the, because essentially, like I say, I think they'd classified like over 2,000 samples. They'd narrowed it down into 6 clades essentially. Like there was 6 variations. I can't remember what they are now, but I did at the time. Like six groups where they go, well, they're kind of a little bit genetically distinct, and then but everything falls under those umbrellas.
So kind of like 6 foundational variants essentially, and everything else is spurred from there.
Yeah, that was the kind of conclusion of the galaxy at the time, I think. But there's other things going on, people trying it in different ways, and to be honest with you, having said there wasn't much, it's starting to really like go quickly, and I've been doing other things, practical things, and traveling a lot, so I've got a whole lot to catch up on actually in terms of literature. But do you know what else is kind of surprising? Like, I was disillusioned moving into the cannabis industry a little bit with. I really had a lot of faith in the peer review system in science. Like, I thought it was really robust, but I think some of the things I've seen published on cannabis has been terrible, especially when they've done certain things. We'll look at the biochemical interactions, and then we'll tell you how we grew the plants under these different conditions. The attention to detail there is terrible,
right.
And one paper, I think it was like they done everything at 18 degrees Celsius. And I'm talking about growing plants all the way through, but they never like mentioned that as being an abnormality or a reason why they never justified it.
Right.
And that's just one example of so many horrendous mistakes, or just like incompetence, or things that are just why we've had papers rejected for you've only shown that interaction 2 different ways, or the third one would be really put a nail in it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, what? Yeah. And then
seems like a crucial variable, obviously.
Aye. But a lot of these are, I don't know why. Not all of them. I mean, there's some really great work, obviously. But I just became really, I had less faith in that kind of peer review system since then. And it was an unexpected surprise for me, to see that was not being done. But I understand why. There was not a whole lot of cannabis experts, and there's certainly not a whole lot of cannabis plant experts, if you know what I mean.
There's
plenty of people who can talk at the Ethan Rutho's level about the chemistry and about neuroscience and stuff like that. There's more of those guys, I think, than there is actually plant scientists into cannabis, which is crazy. Which is why the CIC, the Cannabis Industry Council, we was one of the things that I kind of made me start the plant science subgroup there as well. Was no one was talking about the actual plant, and I was like, oh man, we better factor that in, or that's not going to be, if we don't understand how it works, we might end up slipping up on the regulations, and
just you talking about that, Gary, actually, because you mentioned that in the article that at the moment it's more along the lines of the biological analysis is dictated based on policy, but it should be the other way. You talk about that. I mean, what do you think the is necessary to kind of align that situation. Just more of what you're doing.
All right. I think so. Like the genetic tendency of the plant, right? Why does it flower? It flowers to set seed, right? We hold back the pollen and capture all the flowering essence, right? Like it's not flower. It's it's I don't know. You can classify it as brachioles and pistils and whatever. It's we just call it flowers. That's the easiest way to just refer to it for now. Like that unpollinated, tissue is essentially following what it's programmed to do with setting seed. And it sets seeds at different parts of the plant at different times. That's what it's genetically programmed to do, And I've actually seen it in different ways. I've seen the top of the plant go first, and I've seen the bottom of the plant go first. And I've seen it just kind of patchy all throughout as well. But it very rarely happens all at the same time, and that's what it's genetically programmed to do. So we take away the pollen, take away the seeds, and when you're looking at flower production now, you have that same thing where it's genetically programmed to, get to that level of maturity at slightly different times. And that, just understanding that as a variable, I think is important when you're trying to put caps on medicinal cannabis with things like plus or minus 10% of the 22%, which you homogenise the sample and you found the average was 22, can't be plus or minus 10% of that. So it can't be below 20% or above 24%. Yeah, that's right. But we know just by moving to a different part of the canopy on a plant that's grown under its natural architecture, you could get a 15 or 20% difference in that cannabinoid expression, So I'm like, why is this not factored in? Why are we being so stringent? And then actually what's happening, instead of Kyle Esplin of the Scottish Hemp Association, a really good article on this, what ends up happening is you get medicine there that says something on the label and you test it and it's highly variable from that, which is not a good thing, especially when you have a tendency of medicine with CBD as a counteractive to the psychoactive effects of the THC, so it's not too strong for people who are inexperienced. And that again, that was just something that stuck out. It was like, well, we need to talk about this. Like this is and we can manage that. The plants, there's cultivation intervention to do that, and there's different ways of growing, and producing medicine, and there's also a line between medicine and what is cannabis, because it's so many things. It's so many things, and we often get, we find ourselves often talking about everything and one thing at the same time, but as a plant and as someone who studied a few different organisms, like just insane amount of productivity out of the plant in all directions, from structural right through to, as we saying, medical. It's a crazy range of things, and some of the things, like some of its properties are so unique, and the fact that it grows so fast. It's I often tell people one of my favorite stages of life is like the first 12 days, like from the seedling emerging, like the next kind of 12 14 days, because that rate of growth is like phenomenal. It just they just soldier on so quickly, and that always impressed me. As an organism that offers so much, it grows so fast and it's done so quickly, in comparison to other crops, even, like,
so disproportionately.
Yeah. I mean, like, a lot of the crops have been, like, genetically driven through selection and various things for many, many centuries, actually. And cannabis is, I don't know, it's been through some degree of that in some places. Obviously, it's been used for tens of thousands of years. We think, to all evidence, suggests so. But even as recently as like 2,500 years ago, or whenever that sample was analysed from that Chinese tomb.
Yeah.
You know that story, yeah.
Yeah. Was it in his wee pouch or something, or was it something like that?
I don't know. I can't remember where it was found, but I remember they had intact trichomes.
Yeah. All right, nice.
And I was like, "What? That's just like
the guy's like frozen in joint pose."
I mean, but that was just like, another example of how in the name is that still intact. Like, it seems so fragile, and I've seen cultivation plants like, don't shake the trays, they start raining trichomes, it's just but it's just such a different reality how the cannabis plant's been used in different places, from those massive big hemp plants out in China, which is used for a lot of cord and rope and stuff like that. Right through to kind of modern cultivars with multi-use purposes, where they'll provide seed for animal feed or oil, and they'll provide husk and stuff for processing for hempcrete or whatever, and sometimes things in between as well. And and I think we've only really scratched the surface of it, because of the partition in the law between hemp's kind of okay to go if you watch what you're doing and blah 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 blah, and you've got a permit and etc., and then getting to cannabinoid based cannabis is more difficult, obviously, but that divide is completely artificial in terms of it's just one species, right? And I always find it hard to accept that they go, oh, hemp, and it's like, no, it's cannabis, it's cannabis, and it does a different thing, but we should treat it all and breed it together, because I think that's when we'll get much more diversity involved, and go back to some of the old land races that are still wild, and and just we're at this stage now where I think we're getting to the point where there's mass amounts of people working on it. So we should start to find patterns and things, and we should be able to move it on. And there's some big interesting projects happening, even within some of the companies within the UK. They're doing their own research and making really good progress, not only to speak about a lot of it, but
I know, unfortunately.
That's cool stuff. And then even, like I said, lucky enough to travel, and I can talk a bit more about those things. Cultivation done on scale was just, it's breathtaking every time you see it, especially when it's done really well. But when you go, somewhere tropical or something like that, and it's all outdoor, and it's just blazing sun, and then the scientist in me just can't help but think, how is this affecting, and I need to understand what the difference is, and that's what I could just continue today, was understand what different environments and how cannabis responds to it. And it basically got me to this conclusion that, despite including the stuff I was saying about how the flower sets at different times slightly, it's just offset ever so slightly throughout the plant usually. Despite that, there's when you look at the cannabinoids and terpenes and all the rest of it, you have this massive plasticity. There's nothing the same, right? Everything's slightly different every time, whether it's the testing or this bud to that bud or whatever. It's all just slightly, and actually it's a function of phenotypic plasticity. There's a micro environment, or which is influencing what the cues that each part of the plant is getting. That's definitely a part of it, but there's also differences in expression of the genes in different parts of the plant, and how much one is influencing the other, I don't know, but that's it's kind of been proven in a few really good publications actually. But this is something again that I'm really interested to explore, and I really think that we need to, and we're working on it with the CIC, actually putting a document together to say that, look, here's how the plant actually behaves. Okay, and we're not necessarily using that to say use that for this policy or that policy, or to do this. It's just this is how it behaves, and this is why you have variation, and don't blame the SOPs or the people managing the plants. It's actually it's genetically built in, and we can understand, like I said, how to control some of it with cultivation intervention, and things like that. But a lot of that stuff is hard to scale up. If you have a kind of single canopy spread, such as in a scrog, if you've got 13,000 plants in each of your 5 greenhouses, that's a lot of that's a lot of manual labor every day, and that's that's a real problem actually. But again,
sorry, no, on you go.
I was just going to say, it kind of brings me back to that line between medical and other cannabis is a bit weird. It would actually, in my head, and I'm not speaking for anyone else here, but if we unleashed a cannabis the decriminalization of cannabis, for example, I think it would be much easier then to get the medicine end it right.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I mean? Like it's one of the problems is everything's getting kind of squeezed through this medicine, and it's so tightly regulated, and that it's causing a bottleneck in the progress. And it's not. I mean, like, there's many factors to it. It's not as simple as that. But I think I see that as an issue, and because it's interesting again what they did in Thailand and how they've called it they call it a wellness thing, instead of a medical thing. It's a wellness thing, which makes a lot of sense to me actually. You know what I mean? Like and that wellness is something that people do in order to enhance their life and and feel more relaxed or feel better about themselves or whatever, or feel peace and calm, and all these things can be, when you say them out loud, it's like, you're just describing smoking weed. I'm like, I'm not. I'm talking about I'm talking about breathing exercises. It's all, you know what I mean? It's the same place, and it's a lot of the same symptoms. Aye, that's kind of my take on that.
It is kind of almost dizzying the amount of factors that are involved with just trying to figure out the behavior of what's going on, and then even if you were to take away the societal framework, that's whatever regulations it, and go down to exactly your expertise of the genetic interaction based in the environment, that in itself is like a lifetime's worth of work waiting to happen.
Yeah, exactly, man. Exactly. That's so spot on. And we're only looking at that, a lifetime of work looking at one strain or a few strains.
Exactly.
As soon as you start to really.
I think you wrote that in the CIC article when you'd mentioned that would be the starting point, where if we were to have a collection of an environment in which you can simulate the same grow circumstances repetitively, and then you had a counterpoint to that where it was a specific variant which could be applied to various environments. The thing that first popped to mind for that is, how would you establish that, like from not from the repetitive not from the environment circumstance, like how would you establish a variant which would be applied to various environments? First off, I mean, how would that even happen?
Sorry, by variant, and I meant a varietal, the same cultivar.
A specific genetic formulation, essentially.
Yeah, so imagine we have the test site where we can test the genetics. One of the spaces in there, we also have this. Let's just call it, UK cultivar for easy.
Right.
That's the UK standard cultivar, right? It gets kept in that environment, and you can, if you've got a license, or you're in the process of getting a license, you can come and you can get clones of this thing to test how your environment is doing. We know the numbers of this in the standard place, and we now have a database of all the different performances in all the different places. And we can, if they do their thing, most of these places have really tightly controlled environments, and they're taking logs of it. And I love that. I love that data. I can swim in that all day, to find things. But it's great because at this stage, then we're going, okay, we've got this one cultivar from the same kind of mother plant being grown in all these different environments, and you can take an average from that, and you can see how does that match with our average grown environment, right? That's just one thing. The other thing you can do is you can look at that and you can see, well, in that place they had in all the LED places there is 50% more CBD. I don't know, I'm just making it up, right? But you know what I mean, like whatever patterns fall out of that, and then now from that we can say, okay, so now we can start to fine tune what environmental factors are influence which parts of the plant. We have a standard way of testing it, we have a standard cultivar, and we have a controlled environment from which everyone gets the same starting material. And as we accumulate that data over time, I think it would be really telling in how the plant behaves in these different environments. But right now, I mean, it gets done a little bit in certain ways, but it doesn't get done in a scientific way and in a broad way over time where we accumulate it. A lot of these studies are, I seen a study the other day, and one of the cultivars used was cheetah piss, and I'm just reading a science paper about cheetah piss. What's happening here, But it was cool in a sense, but at the same time, I was thinking, this is a modern cultivar, and I understand we want to analyze those as well, but at some point we must draw a line and say, okay, we'll stick with this one for the next 5 years, and we might expand and have a few that we can do it with. That would be the ideal situation, because then you can really test the gene function then, because if you have the DNA and all the environmental stuff and they've been mapped in the same places, and you see, well, in that environment, this one varies that much, and that one only varies by that much. And again, it's like almost an impossible piece of work. Like you would need a lot of funding, and you would need a lot of players, and you would need the government on board with the program. And that brings me to another point. I feel a real need for a UK cannabis.gov dedicated, department and website that takes, you can use people you can use elements of DEFRA and the Home Office and MHRA. You can use, the kind of representatives in this thing. But I think if we had a UK cannabis school, but not a school, you know what I mean? An institution where all things cannabis goes through that, and then you can go there as an applicant of any kind, or as a potential medical user, and you can find out everything you need to know, everything you need to know. And because I just feel like there's a shortfall of knowledge in the government end there.
There's no respect towards what's going on. It seems like there's I don't know if between sometimes I think it's easy for like conspiracy theorists to believe that there's a forceful like direction through government. They're woefully being ignorant. I could see why that is, because it's very difficult to not understand. Like there's an emerging industry globally,
Aye, you're right. It's hard to see, because I think I mentioned that in something I was writing recently. Like I don't know what's in the shadows, but I don't care, because we can only deal with what we can see. But yeah, it's kind of weird because everybody seems to be on board, but it's just we just can't really get it moving.
Even the thing when you mentioned DEFRA there, it's like that's the Department of Environment and Farming and stuff. Is that right? The hemp, when you mentioned the difference between hemp, there is no difference. That's that thing where it's just all cannabis, as you mentioned already. So it's like, do you think that'd be a wise move? That would be if this was all to be put in place to remove the entire, is hemp here to stay? The term of hemp, is that what's...
don't get me wrong. It's useful. It's just a bee in my bonnet. You know what I mean? Because it's made out to be like it's a completely different thing. But you can breed them. It's the same species, and and bring back to Kyle Esplin of the Scottish Hemp Association.
Shout out to Kyle on yourself, lad.
He had some data showing that that there was hemp samples with like 3% THC, and there was some confiscated cannabis samples with like 2.9 THC. So the hemp sample was hotter than the confiscated, and that was from the 70s, I think it was. And he's been really good at documenting all that stuff.
It was actually Kyle that showed me the Fista Labs thing. Something that showed me that. Because that's what sometimes when you think of hemp as well, it's just like cannabis suppressed, really.
Aye, and well, I don't know what the natural variation would be if we hadn't come up with this, like, it has to be under this for so many, I don't know, 50 years or something, right?
Yeah.
Because, as you say, it's like, and I also think that to a certain degree, it's very rare, like, you shut down one genetic pathway and you don't have something else be affected negatively. You know what I mean? Like, if you're suppressing THC synthesis, I don't know, like maybe THCA synthase, plays a part in early development or something like that, and like you've selected against it, and now you've got slower growth, or I don't know. Again, I'm just making up, examples. When you push on the decelerator, you often get like something else being affected. The genes don't always just have one function. That's it. Even if it's just a really transient function at some point in development. There was a really interesting story, if I can quickly share, about
without a doubt,
there was someone, kind of friend of a friend through, I can't remember which institution it was now, but they were trying to, they had the idea, okay, so let's make a THC water soluble version of THC. The plant produces it, right? And the story goes, again, I can't verify this, so it might all be hocus pocus, but the story goes that they actually managed to achieve what they think was a water-soluble version of THC. But the problem was they could not take the plant beyond like week 4 of veg. They just started to die every time. And it was interesting because there's all this talk about 35 and 39% THC, which sounds crazy to me because there's a physiological barrier, and also like, I think that at a certain point, you'll probably have maybe some kind of toxic effects from the THC to the plant. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's enough already,
Yeah.
which I think that soluble THC story kind of proves, because as it started to produce its cannabinoids, they just kept dying because it was just dispersing. It wasn't contained in the oily, in the oily capsule that is the trichome. So, I think that's a potential that will lead on, on how not to over egg and over desire like really high THC,
Yeah.
because the plant does produce a lot more valuable chemicals, and I think THC is a good one, but it's not, you don't need it in the ridiculous amounts to to get what you're looking for from it. But
especially considering it's like 500 plus phytochemicals altogether, so it's like that's like a nauseating amount of research just beginning. I mean, what is it on at the moment? Like 116, 120 of cannabinoids that are just made aware of.
I don't know. Like I say, I'm a wee bit. I feel out of the loop for the last few months. I'm kind of started reading again the last few days, last few weeks actually. But no, I'm not up to speed yet, because again, there's a lot of crap coming through, and I get excited by the title, and then I read the abstract and I go, oh, how did you prove that? And then I read the paper and I was like, oh, you didn't prove that.
Right, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, it's so disappointing, man. It's really disappointing.
Said obviously you've been busy the past couple of months. I actually watched some of your podcast with Jorge and Steph.
Oh, nice one.
It was brilliant. It was good. You know what I thought was the best thing about that, Gary, was I read the comments and somebody went, Gary and Steph needs to learn better English.
I know, I've seen that. I was raging. Oh, the swear words. The swear words that came out my mouth, that read that, by the way.
That was hilarious, because the thing is as well, like I interviewed Gary Yates last year or maybe the year before. Obviously he's from Liverpool, and then somebody wrote the same thing, went, I'm really interested in this conversation, but I can't understand either people.
It's like, such a shame.
Oh, it's hilarious. It's like, especially considering fucking your academic background, I just thought it was just icing on the cake,
because I speak so softly compared to how I started out.
Yeah.
My family still gives me a hard time for it sometimes,
I mean,
it's justified.
Maybe. How did that collaboration come about?
What's it? Oh, with Jorge?
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, like that's great. And Stefan, yeah, well, I mean, shout out to Stefan first. He often doesn't get the shout out at the same level, but yeah, he's does a lot of things, and you should try and get him on, because his origin story is amazing.
Quality, I will do.
His story is amazing. His way into cannabis was amazing. It'd be really interesting for the viewers in the UK, because he's a Swiss guy, and his story over there, like, staying on the right side of the law, but I don't want to spoil the story. It's amazing, but he's a lot to do with the collaboration as well, and what we do with Jorge. But essentially it was because Jorge and Tom from Seedsman are friends. Right. They go way back, and they've been talking for a while, about collaborating in some way. And then Jorge was, he'd kind of semi-retired for a while, or fully retired, I think, in like 2016, and then I think I can't remember. I might be fudging these dates, right? But the cannabis industry obviously kind of exploded in the US, and he can kind of came back into it a little bit to see what was going on, and so they were talking, and they got this idea. Well, Jorge's obviously a writer; he's going to keep writing, and then they came up with the idea of having me edit parts of the book, or go through the book and like kind of pull out the bro science, try and pull out the bits that didn't really, stand up to scrutiny. And there's a lot of bits in it that broke my heart to be like, we can't say that because that doesn't work like that. It can't possibly work like that.
Right.
But a lot of the times, what the outcome was good and it should be done, but the description of why it was happening, that was the bit was like, okay, don't oversell that, because we don't really know what's happening there. So let's just not say what's happening there if we don't know. We just say this happens and that is the outcome.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? It was just things like that.
The individuals, because obviously it's for anybody that's unaware, it's a community given advice book essentially that's orchestrated through the community. Is that right?
Yeah. So sorry, Connor. Just to fast forward, so I started off as just a bit of an edit.
Right.
Like that was the plan, but then we ended up just like, with Stefan as well, we ended up just collaborating, working really well as a team, and we just kind of churned it out together. you know, and kind of shaped it. And obviously Jorge done most of the heavy lifting on it, of course. But yeah, the whole point was to make it community driven. So the idea was to make a digital book for the first time for Jorge, you know, sponsored with Seedsman, who are obviously really good e-commerce business, you know, and to try and make it community led and built. So the idea is because like me and Stefan obviously put some scientific and scrutiny under what Jorge was writing, which comes from the kind of the legacy market. You know, we were kind of sieving through it and going, okay, that, you know, but then we thought, well, if we did this on scale, if everybody had a say in this, it would really be like a kind of indestructible, you know, resource.
Like it's like a nucleus of information, really.
Exactly. And we can just, because obviously every environment's different, every grow setup's different, and there's so much more and more manufacturers of all the different things. You know, it's getting exponential, the amount of variables you can have in any one kind of situation, and the genetics obviously as well. So, I mean, you could write a book for each, you know, cultivar or for each setup. So that was the idea, was just to start off with this, put it out, make it free so everybody could get it, and then, you know, at some point we'll start to get feedback and we'll start to incorporate that in, and we'll update the version of the book with that extra feedback in, and onwards and upwards essentially. But Jorge was really, I mean, he's such a nice and humble guy as well. So is Stefan. They're great people. I feel really privileged to be even just, you know, despite the fact that they're legends in the cannabis space, even despite that, just as people, they're really, really cool. So that's a pleasure for me to work with those guys. And yeah, but the idea is just to, you know, keep brainstorming, keep moving forward, and seeing where the industry takes us, and, you know, working towards you know, a really good resource. That's the thing. That's the key to have a resource that people can go back to, and it can be modified as the science changes, for example. But Jorge was always insistent on, we need to make it for beginners. Everybody, you know, all these new people that have got a chance to grow that never used to, you know, they can. We're talking largely about America, states where people can do these things, you know, in some European countries you can do what you want in your bedrooms, kind of thing, you know. So what you know, was really a book to appeal to those guys, to the guys who wanted to try it but didn't really know where to start. But I mean, and having said that, the level of detail in it is insane. You know, it does go deep in a lot of areas. So yeah, it was just a great journey to go through that, and the collaboration I think has been great. You know, and yeah, watch this space in terms of what's coming next. But I think there's a kind of a few exciting things in the pipeline with Jorge and Seedsman's coming up.
Excellent. Hopefully, I mean, I've had Tom on the channel before. Hopefully, he'd be up for coming on again. We'll chat about that. That'd be excellent.
We're having a little bit of technical difficulties with the website on Seedsman just now, which is unfortunate. Just a little bit of transition, and it's kind of the back end's a little bit clunky, so they're fixing that up. So if anybody's, you know, rushing over there to get the free book, they might be hit by this page is not available kind of thing.
Well, I got it like about an hour ago, maybe, something like that. So I clicked through it, went through the Seedsman thing, and I managed to get it. So maybe it's been fixed.
Nice one, yeah. It's kind of been going off and on a little bit, so just to warn anybody that watches this, as we do know when it is getting addressed. You know,
that's what was so cool about it, though. When I had a quick glance over the contents of the book, I was hoping to be able to get a general overview of some key points in it. And quite honestly, for a beginner's guide, it's extensive. You know, it's really it's phenomenal.
There was large sections of the book where I was just, I just can't, I don't know. I've got nothing to say on that. Do you know what I mean? It was just so in depth, and especially with like the room setup and stuff like that. You know, it was really interesting.
Finished off the last time on talking about the book, and just essentially about the novelty behind what you have done, because it's a digital online beginner's guide, community orientated. What was the most notable thing you extracted from the work? I mean, was there any piece of information that stood out and still is kind of like at the front of your mind?
I mean, again, it highlighted the variation and all the kind of crazy and wonderful approaches people have had to come up with, because, you know, oftentimes a lot of the innovation was done under the radar. So, you know, you had to makeshift things that, you know, one of the things that is remarkable is the technology available now compared to when Jorge started. So when you look at some of his older books for reference, the basic elements were there, but now you can have like sensors that can control every aspect of your environment inside a tent. That's all reasonably accessible costs for anybody working at home, which is quite a remarkable thing. Do you know what I mean? Because it takes some of the guesswork and some of the, I guess, the experience and knowledge out of the equation. So that was, if you take it further into the kind of commercial side and automation of the processes as well, and a lot of the technology that's come from other crops, even things like CNIs that can detect ripeness, and because they can use different light spectrums for the cameras, the ripeness can be detected by color or even by things that we can't detect with the naked eye, and such as trichomes change color over the ripeness, from kind of early stage through to the kind of late stage amber color, and that will give off different refractive indexes as well when you shoot certain light at it. So there's ways to read things that robots and automation can do, as well, which just that's the thing that's probably the most remarkable actually, is just the upgrade in technology and how that's being applied. The vertical farm units as well. I'm kind of talking big scope here, try to cover everything really quickly. But vertical farm units, which are enclosed and can be entirely self-contained and efficient, they produce their own heat and they clean their own water and stuff, and they can be stacked on top of each other. They can quadruple your output per square meter, because obviously you go up. So just think, like all that side of things, and it's something I do with my job at Pharma Seeds, is to kind of like try and keep up with that side of the technology. So when the opportunity comes, a lot of it's, you need a big budget for a lot of it. But when that opportunity comes and the right fit, then you can implement an innovative technological solution to a problem that would be otherwise hard to solve.
It's kind of fascinating, Gary, because most of this stuff, obviously, like myself, people won't even have a fucking clue that that's the level we're at. Because if people are just working obviously independently, or unless you're actually part of the machine, essentially, you're not going to be. I mean, I think you called it in that interview, the podcast you did, a golden age of innovation when it comes to cannabis.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because again, when I met Jorge, and I met him in Amsterdam at the Green Tech Expo, which is just a big cultivation expo with a little medical cannabis corner, tucked away. So you really got to see everything on display. And the Dutch have been really good at innovating in hydroponics and things like that, and horticulture end of things, with their cut flowers and all their kind of fruits and veg. They're really good at that. So you get to see the kind of latest up-to-date versions of that. And then the companies who have a foot in the cannabis industry also then applying it to that. And some of them just outright just saying, oh, it doesn't matter, this works for any plant. Whether, because some of them were just like robotic arms that do from the small pot to the next pot up. But they just do it on a conveyor belt, and it's completely self-contained. And all you do is just feed them trays full of one size of pot, and then collect a tray at the other size all potted up. And things like that. I mean, I've always liked a hands-on experience of working with plants. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I guess there's a need for it in some places.
I mean, to be honest, the thing that's keep coming to mind when you're saying that, I was like, it's just so cold.
Aye, exactly. But I mean, like, it's one of the reasons. It's a strange one because the cannabis industry is just, it's not settled globally. The North Americans have only recently allowed recreational use and etc. And then Thailand and Malta, places like that are kind of falling in. Some places in South America, but the value of a gram of dry flower, it's not really normalized in the UK and the EU. We've retained consistency in the value of that at the medical end for the duration really. But actually, at the same time, value of cannabis in the US has dropped substantially. And that's, there's Canada, for example, have overstock issues, so their industry went boom and bust, and it was like billions, 300 million in the hole or something. I can't remember what the number was. You could look that up, but but the other thing was they had a surplus of cannabis, and a lot of it was really high quality. So that pushed the price of the cost per gram down there quite a bit, even although the way that the license system work has kind of protected against it a little bit. There's still obviously in all these countries there's still an element of black market as well, and that's where you see the fluctuation in prices, because people report on that, and it's quite interesting, because it seems to be the black market's the quickest to react to the change in prices. It seems to be anyway. So, but if you take it all in all, it just paints a picture of we don't know what the price of a gram is going to be. We know the price of of fluxes, but we know the price of a barrel of oil or a gram of grain. You know what I mean? That's a kilo of grain. And it moves, but it's fairly it's trackable and it's consistent. Right now, globally, the price of a gram of cannabis is anything. In Thailand, it was going for $35-$45 a gram when they were first opened. The dispensaries and stuff, because there was so little there. So and then the Canadians are paying as on the street as little as six Canadian dollars, which is like £4.50. You know what I mean? It's such a crazy scale. So
I've got an image in my mind of that. There's a lot of pictures online, and one of them is where it's like how cannabis should be. Never mind like selling it, and it's just somebody handing somebody like a cup full of bud, just as like a fucking tomatoes or juice. It's that kind of dynamic, though. Right? Like that's where it should be. It shouldn't be a commercialized thing. It should be a neighbour to like a bag of sugar kind of thing.
That's the weird thing about cannabis, and even because especially outside the UK is very focused on medical, right? So let's just talk about the other parts of the cannabis industry that's outside that. Is like what you tend to see is is very community driven, because it's very much a community thing. You can't take that away from cannabis. You know what I mean? It's strange even when it scales up and stuff, because good people like to work with good people, and that kind of sense comes through a lot stronger in cannabis than it does in other industries that I've been involved in. So I think you're bang on there. There's a certain element of just like making it cold and corporate, and it loses something in that process. But I mean, Connor, so does the quality of food. They going to the supermarket, going to a standard supermarket and buying some fruit and veg. It's so hit or miss, especially this time of year. And I'm quite happy to accept there's no blueberries at this time of year. I don't need them to come into Colombia and then my missus to pay £3 for a pound of them, and then them to be absolutely, sour and brick hard. I think that is a complete waste of everybody's time and effort. And that's the way cannabis could go. It would be amplified in cannabis though, because the consumers tend to be so on top of the quality control, if you know what I mean. Like most of the long-term users are really on top of that kind of, they know what quality is, and they don't like anything below that a certain threshold. I think there'll be more, and that's why, again, go back to the community thing. The cannabis community will buffer itself in a lot of these respects, because I'm pretty sure if you had the choice of buying, just assume Scotland was fully decriminalised and you could do whatever you want, and you had the choice of buying like Monsanto's, £3 a gram, blah 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 blah, or wee Johnny for down the road who you've known for 40 years, 30 amount of time, and you've always known his stuff's good, and it's £2 dearer, but you know what I mean. You're always going to be that guy because you know him and he's there, and you know what I mean. And that I think that side of things, if we went all the way to the some of the states in America with your complete recreational use, I think that would happen much quicker here. You would get that buffering. But the problem is as well, like tourism and new users don't know what they're doing often, so they'll just whatever's quick and easy and cheap, that's what they go for. As you can see, and like I guess that's, some people complain about the quality of cannabis in Amsterdam.
Right.
And and that's one of the reasons why, because it's just a tourism based, apparently, and again we can't verify this, but apparently a lot of the Dutch people prefer to smoke hash than flower.
Yeah. Interestingly, when you said that, I've only went to Amsterdam once. It was like I would refer to it as a fast food attempt to Amsterdam, because we went on a Friday and we were home on the Sunday. But that's why I noticed the black at the time. Like I was getting really good black over here at the time, and went over there and I was really disappointed, because that was the thing I was looking forward to most.
I mean, again, there's probably a better element of quality control in the black market there than there is in the coffee shops. But I also hear that Amsterdam is like very, that kind of stands out between other places that you can find coffee shops in the Netherlands. You know, it's like obviously they're not geared towards tourism, then they have a much better and more balanced kind of quality element. But I've yet to experience that. I'm afraid I'm really on my radar, but.
It sounds good, actually, and it also kind of touches on what you were saying about the community, because most likely their quality, if that's the case, is slightly higher. It's because they'll have their regulars coming in. That's their local regulars, you know, so they've kind of got that community regulation thing.
Mm-hmm. And they'll have a natural way of, like, you know, not natural way, just like a kind of experienced way of knowing what's good and what's not, and that's you know, I'm not taking that shit. You know what I mean? Looking at that, oh crap, because you know, you just don't want. Nobody wants to be left with a bunch of subpar product. You know.
Yeah. Especially if it's a weekly fucking Friday night thing, and you're like, come on, man, you're ruining my weekend here.
Exactly. But it's funny, man. It's funny how it changes over the world. I just don't think it's normalised yet. It's not settled. And until it does, I think we'll struggle really to get a grasp on what's going on in terms of what, because that's the problem right now. We can't really gauge this size of the industry. It's all estimates, and it's because we don't really know if everybody got a license who's applying for a license, and everybody said they're going to sell as much cannabis into the medical industry as they said. They'd hit surplus in no time. Yeah. And then, all the money would fall out it and the price would come down, and then we'd be back. We'd just be copying what they did in Canada, and, that's not what we want to do.
I don't know.
At the same time, man.
Sorry, man.
I was just going to say, at the same time, it's just painfully slow to move in any direction, which is. It's like watching like a slow crash. You know what I mean? Like just slowly edging towards the cliff, and it's just like, no, he's not going to make it. You just
To be honest, I did it's not just applicable to the UK. I think it's like a global thing, because I picture the international landscape for cannabis, and I can't help but think it is that kind of like stronghold through like on an international scale down, and then it trickles down to like sovereign states. But I think there's an international rhetoric of prohibition. That's what I mean. It sounds too far-fetched, all that kind of shit, but when you look at how, as you're describing, how brokenly slow it is, and at the same time you combine that with what we were saying a second ago, as if they were to allow the opportunity for a community-driven thing, all the capitalistic elements would have to fade as a consequence of allowing that community element. So every time any form of legislation gets put in place, like the idea of like cannabis social clubs, or like communities like in Uruguay where you can do 99 plants but then give it medically, it's so restricted, and yet it seems like the best option.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point. And also, like, a lot of people have weird, like, sorry, let me rephrase that. There's a lot of people with unique illnesses, and like, some cannabis works for them and some doesn't, and finding the right one. Because, like, imagine if you don't know anything about it and you have a condition that people say, oh, cannabis can help with that, and then you go to the doctor and you get given a cannabis that's commercially grown. It's it doesn't have. Have you spoke with Sarah Godfrey? I think.
Yeah. 2 interviews ago, it was fucking brilliant. Really enjoyed it.
She's really on top of, like, the difference in, like, how organic growing and stuff like that is. She's on such a kind of unwell state that she acts as a really good gauge of what is helping and what's not. So
her level of personal insight to her own circumstance is phenomenal when it comes to these. That's like it's like a real-time analysis of what cannabinoids are active and which aren't.
Exactly. And also the thing that her and Kyle and a few others helped me piece together a couple of different narratives that were completely against what everybody was saying in the medical side of things. And we can get to those in a minute. But the reason why I'm mentioning Sarah there, she's a good gauge of what is good. And she always insists that, the way you grow cannabis is really important to whether it helps her or actually makes her worse. And decarboxylating the cannabinoids entirely, does her more damage than good.
Yeah.
And it's got to do with the process somewhat as well. It's not just the fact that it's decarboxylated, but when you throw these issues in, and it's like, oh yeah, but you have and it can only be done this way, or you lose your license, and then it's like, but if you do that way, it's not helping some of the people who need it. So back to my point, right? So a new patient doesn't know anything about cannabis. Try this cannabis. They get some of that which let's just call it commercial crap for ease of language.
Yeah.
You get some commercial crap, it doesn't do any difference, or it makes them worse or whatever. Then the cannabis terrible, don't do it. No, it didn't work. They don't have the insight or the knowledge of the industry to know that. Well, some of the lines that cannabis is coming through is like, as patients are reporting, it's really poor quality. And yeah, there's no there's no real buffer against that because it can't be a community thing when it's an individual getting a prescription from a doctor. You know what I mean?
Which is interesting, because when you were talking about that the last time about excuse me, the sequencing of the cannabis genome and the positive impact that will have towards like a crazy increase in personalized medicine. I mean, like, what's the right at this moment in time in the UK? What's the current hurdles from putting that in the way? Like, just exclusive legislation, or is there like a logistics issues that follow it?
Putting what in place, Connor?
The ability to like essentially sequence the cannabis genome, or at the very minimum, like increase the ability to understand what's actually active and what's doing.
Right. So it's funny because we had a meeting with a few different government departments, all to do with plants and plants and seed and food. And the thing that came up was that we need to have a center of excellence to understand this stuff better. And they were talking about a 2-year trial for growing out cannabis to prove that it's unique. And I said, well, genotyping, sequencing the genome is cheaper than doing that now. Why would you waste money try to get a licensed facility built up, which is millions of pounds already, and then have pay staff and you have to run it and blah blah blah, when you could just simply get a sample of the tissue and send it to a lab and then get an analysis back, and then it's unique or not. You don't. In fact, you can get the lab to do the analysis, so you just got a piece of paper back that says, yes, this is unique enough to be registered as a genetic or not. And the answer was, yeah, although that's happening, they don't have the infrastructure in place to do that. And that obviously there's some elements that, to be honest with you, you need the phenotype to understand the genotype.
Right.
There needs to be some, because it's already saying, okay, this DNA is unique, but that might produce something like really inconsistent as a product,
Right.
And that's not what they want. They want something consistent. That's the whole point of registering genetics and getting them out, is so that whenever someone buys them, it grows in a certain way and produces a certain, value to that grower. That's how other crops work, essentially. But we cannot register high THC varieties in the UK, because even though there's licenses now to grow high THC varieties, you cannot register them because the government doesn't have a licensed facility to grow them out and test them in, so that they can be approved to be put on the list for approved varieties. Like, so the government, the Home Office, is given licenses and saying, yeah, you can grow high THC cannabis, but another branch of the government saying, no, you can't grow any high THC cannabis that aren't on this list. And we say, well, there is no cannabis on that list. And they say, yeah, we know, because we can't verify it. And it's like, all right, cool, nice.
That's funny. That's really funny, actually, because in the most negative sense ever. Because when I was speaking to Dr. Anna Ross the other day, she said the same thing. She was like, if everybody just got each other's back, if one person just said to the next person, they just said to the next person, and like each branch of government was to just be more consistent, then you'd be able to have a movement forward instead of this broken fucking dialogue. Not even a dialogue. It's just not even happening.
Yeah. And that's what it is. Like, that's what I said about a kind of centre of excellence for cannabis, or cannabis.gov, whatever you want to call it. And you have someone from DEFRA, and someone from AFA, and someone from NIAB, and someone from MHRA, and someone from Home Office, someone from policy. And, you pull them all in and you go, right, that's the cannabis team. But then you bring someone who's also a cannabis expert in as well, because you need that element, I think. Yeah, and then you can start getting these things, patched up. But as your other guest pointed out, it's totally true. There's a disjointed nature to it. One side doesn't know what the other side's doing. One side's blocking, the other one's allowing. And of course, whenever you get them in front of you, there's always a big shield of red tape which they can hide behind. So, well, we're just following this procedure which was written in this date and blah blah blah. And you're just like, okay. That's not helpful, I find it weird in this modern age, Connor. We've got such advanced technology, and we're still dealing with an archaic governmental system. Do you know what I mean? That takes an age to do everything, and it's quite embarrassing actually that we've not kind of moved forward in that sense as a country, and we're still held back by traditionalism and things that are really, they're antiquated and they're just not beneficial to modern way of life. And I think that cannabis really highlights that for me.
Yeah.
The lack of movement, and again, as I say, all regulatory bodies are seemingly on board with the idea. Yes, this could be allowed, this could be fine, and then you have you still got a big element of stigma as well, which some doctors just won't. No way. I'm not being liable for that.
Yeah.
And
it was the doctors actually that were popping to mind there, because that's what it feels like in the UK. There's like it's like almost prohibition lives on an interpersonal fucking line. That's what it's like. You know what I mean? It's like you're dealing with depending on the group, you're dealing with an interpersonal individual representing that group that's at a fucking, they're like a wall. That's what it just keeps coming across like.
Yeah. And again, and it's why it's really hard to see what elements pushing back, because it's actually the kind of red tape between the departments. That's the bit that's holding everything back. So you're talking to this department, yeah, it's fine. If as long as you do this, you're fine. And then that department's saying, yeah, as long as you do X, Y, and Z, you're fine. But then if you follow both things, then you're stuck in the tape in between.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Well, you can't possibly follow both of these things. Just kind of simplifying that.
I understand. I get exactly what you mean. And what's interesting is Max Weber, the sociologist, kind of popped to mind because it's like you're dealing with that. It's like a hyper bureaucratization going on, but at the same time, sometimes it feels like that's where it could be. So I said in the last, the first part, where it's like that you could see so easily when you start looking at this that it's like, is there an actual fucking hidden element that's like consciously like it's almost like there's a timeline. Like I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but I did an animation when it was called UK Medical Cannabis, and in it CANNAMAN sits and talks to the news presenter, but it's after, at the very beginning, there's like a fucking news reporter speaking to somebody with medicine, and there's like clinics in the background, and then the next part is like the police goes past, and then there's oh no, and there's like a bus right next to the clinic, so the individual's still getting medicine, and then clicks back to the studio, and CANNAMAN sitting talking to the news guy, and I get CANNAMAN to say essentially that I refer to it in the UK, but it's applicable internationally, that there's like a long con strategy going on, where there's like the illusion of progress, but it's more like incremental steps in a timeline that's already been predestined by people we can't see. That's what it's like. It's like there's a chronology, or at the very minimum, a timeline that something is already dictated, and they're just waiting for the correct. Because what are we dealing with? We're dealing with an international economy that's all about making like I need more. So people that are in a position at the moment, unless they're completely naive and they're going to be in a position where they want to maintain profit from what's to come next. And it sounds conspiratorial, but I mean, I can't see anything else that doesn't allow, unless it's just explicitly the greatest example of, like I said before, interpersonal failing that we're dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because it's really hard, because I'm not a mad conspiracy nut either, but it's like Occam's razor, right? It's the most obvious explanation is there's something like some force that's behind the scenes but it could be it could be it could be a combination of both, a bunch of things, and because there's definitely individuals who are being who can influence. There's certainly powerful individuals who can influence certain things more than others. We've seen that. Recent examples is the Dogecoin fluctuation. Whenever Elon Musk mentioned it on Twitter, I mean, that was insane. Just watching how that, and he can put out a tweet and tank or raise the stock of his companies.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's like, what are we doing here? Do you know what I mean? Like this is crazy. But anyway, the point is, one person having that amount of control or power over something so big is crazy. And I think if you now echo that all the way down, we've seen, I think, blatant examples in COVID of incompetence, let's call it, without going conspiratorial, right? Incompetence in assigning certain companies and people with tasks, such as the track and trace app. I think was like, if you look into how much that cost us, you're like, what? I've got a guy that could have made that for like. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like how can we get these things so horrendously wrong?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Without thinking that someone is doing someone a favor behind it. You know what I mean? They go, he must have just been. And there's always the link that comes out. Yeah, it was so and so's Mrs. Company who, you know what I mean? And it's just like, yeah, again, I don't like to try and I try my best not to get sucked into that conspiracy element of it, but you know, people are corruptible, and corruption has been shown present in British politics, you know, throughout history. So there's no reason to suspect that it doesn't go on now.
Yeah.
And the big players in the game, if you look at the medical claims of cannabis users, right, and you put that, if you wrote down all the conditions and all the kind of symptoms that are alleviated, right, what you see there is a massive dent in the pharmaceutical industry. You know, if that was true and everyone had access to cannabis, they would, the pharmaceutical industry would surely take a huge hit. You know, and I'm not saying that. I'm not being conspiracy to say that. I think that's quite obvious. You know, and quite true. So, like, you know, I'm just saying there is incentive there.
Yeah.
You know,
I think sometimes as well, that's what's so frustrating, because everything you're saying is extremely rational. That's what's so frustrating about this, because there's almost like this abstract notion that even suggesting anything is a threat. That there's a purposeful hand at play. Is like that. I feel the same. I'm not a conspirator. I'm not a guy. I'm the same. But it's like at the same time, it's like this has been too long, and it seems like every piece of progress has been just a small amount of, like, enough to tide over what the culture's currently at, you know, because there's always, it's like almost between every, I don't know, 5 and 15 years, there's like a precipice of cannabis movement, and everybody gets to a point where we're really excited, and then like a small bubble pops, there's a small amount of movement, and it goes all the way back down again for the next 15 years. You're like, what the fuck's going on here?
Aye, but I mean, like, even so, I was doing my PhD out in Durham, right? And I don't know if you know the situation with Durham County and the police stance there, but
Not really.
But at some point during, like, between 2000, I think it was around about 2014 or something like that, the police chief at the time of the County Durham said basically anybody that with kind of low level cannabis things, we're not going to bother prosecuting them. It's just pointless. Do you know what I mean? And if you're growing a factory's worth of cannabis, then yeah, of course we're going to come down on you. But do you know what I mean? Like, in general, just the everyday users and stuff like that, they weren't interested, and they made it public that it wasn't a priority, and they didn't really have the resources to actually do it either. So it made sense. It was like the softest approach that, you know, we had heard. And as you're saying about, you know, things going up, and that was hailed at the time. I remember as a big, because I was in Durham as well. It was like, you know,
like, yes,
you know, and I didn't really see any change in anything there, but it was just interesting to note that, again, that guy, that one person, had a soft, you know, approach to cannabis, I guess, maybe as well, and he could influence an entire county, and then they could, you know, and that's what I'm saying. Like, I feel that our generation has more. How do I say this? Because it's complete guesswork, right? But I think our generation has more. I hate this phrase, but they're more woke to the cannabis side of things, and the kind of let's call them the natural therapeutics, right? To keep everything above board. But they can, because we've got research to show that a lot of the psychedelic compounds are really good for especially mental disorders. And then obviously, you know, you've probably went really deep in a lot of the cannabinoid based research as well, and the things that can solve. And if you just look at that side of things, you know, you've got quite a lot going on there, I guess.
Like a revolution amount of fucking shit going on there. That's like global fucking movement stuff.
Aye, and if we can just get, like, so if our generation's more aware of that, and they probably, if they're not experienced themselves in any way with those things, then they probably know someone who is. And I just hope when we get to the reins of power, then, you know, we can have more chief police like the guy in Durham who are like, yeah, you know what, that's below our concern levels. Because I mean, that's what it is. What happened to the old as long as it's not harming anyone else, do what you want kind of thing. Like a lot of countries in Europe approach. And even when we were in the EU, that was one, you know, attitude that was not kind of brought in, which I always felt. Sometimes I feel that Britain thinks they're better than everyone.
100%.
And they're like, oh, we need to do our own thing. But it's, like I said, it's so entrenched in traditionalism that it's now counterproductive. It's not productive just to stick to, oh, we've been doing this for 100 years, so we should keep doing it. It's like, yeah, man, but we're in the future.
Yeah.
You know, 100 years in the future, should we not at some point go, is this really still relevant, you know?
It's funny actually, because it was a thing that came up. I don't know what I was doing that came up with this thing, but I was questioning tradition. I was like, what is tradition? And I was like, do you know what I came up with? I was like, that tradition is unquestioned routine. That's what tradition is.
Good way. I went through the exact same thing, and what my conclusion was: traditionalism is the counter to productivity.
Yeah.
Sorry, to progression.
Yeah, that's good.
Like, it's got to be. It's the counter to progression, because you just they put the two definitions together, and it's paints the full picture.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, like I think that's part of the problem, and we used cannabis use, traditional use, as an argument for it as well. So but again, that's evolved in a lot of aspects as well. How it's used, and they didn't have vapes. Like when the vaping come around at all.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, so it's very recent. We were growing up when that happened, essentially. So
not a big fan of vapes, quite honestly. I mean, I might get backlash for some folk, but I'm not a big fan of vapes, really. I don't know what it is. It doesn't really. I don't know if it's just like combustion head or whatever with a joint, but I don't know. Vapes just didn't really do the same thing.
I've had similar conversations about this. It's funny. There's a couple of things, again, full spectrum with a higher THC than you would normally have. The kind of Dom pens and stuff you get from California will have like 75% THC in the oil, and that but the crazy thing was, I had a kind of similar conversation with Kyle. And he came up with the idea again. It was crazy, a wee bit unofficial, so don't anyone take this as a kind of based a solution. But he was saying having two varieties at the same time is quite good, or either two vapes, or just kind of like mixing it gives him the same effect as smoking. So, but it's funny, that you can't smoke on a UK prescription, right? That's not covered. Right.
It's bizarre. It's like illegal to do that.
Aye, but vaping is
legal. That's what I mean. That's interesting. What the same again. If you're walking about and you've got your vape and you've got your medical cannabis and you're stopped, that's legal. But if you're using that same prescription with tobacco and smoking it, you're a criminal.
Or even if you just wrap it up in paper and stick a wee bit of cardboard in the end of it, like all of a sudden, do you know what I mean? Oh, you can't do that.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, what is that on a sociological basis? What does that say? That's like a hyper fucking police element towards personal sovereign medicine.
It's certainly like I mean, we could really argue the merits of dry flower as medicine versus wellness versus fun versus social interaction. The cannabis can be used for all of those things. But actually, when we talk about severely ill people with conditions that only cannabinoid medicines solve, then I'm all for like really tightly controlled potency and capsules and oils that what you're given dose wise. I think that makes sense to me, especially if it's children that are unwell. But like for dry flower, if you're allowing that to be vape but not smoke, that again, there's actually a recent study. Where did that come out? I don't know if you've seen it. Was the long-term smoking of cannabis was not detrimental
to your lung capacity. They used the lung test. If it's the same one, actually, they came up with the people that it could be wrong, but I'll have to actually check when I'm doing editing. But that your lung capacity, in some of the cases, lung capacity was greater than that of people that don't smoke cannabis. Is that right?
I think it was that one. Because was one of the proxies they were using, was it something like they had chemo? Is that what it was? Was that one of the things that all the people in the thing had chemo?
I've no idea. I can't remember.
Maybe I'm getting two things mixed up. I often do. I get I read two studies back to back, and then they become one study.
It's like meta-analysis here.
That's why I do all my best work written and not spoken. Do you know what I mean? It's a chance to check these things. But yeah, I think there was two studies. One was the lung capacity, and then I think it was maybe a different one. They showed that smoking cannabis, not vaping or oil consuming, smoking cannabis had no adverse effects to patients who were going under a certain type of radiotherapy. And I think it was a chemotherapy. I can't remember the exact date. I'll need to look it up. But that was a recent one as well. So there's been a couple of things. There was a Spanish sort of health thing as well. Was that another one that was long-term cannabis users from the social clubs?
I think so.
Aye. So there's some interesting stuff coming out that, you know, because again, the tobacco. Some people will say that the organically grown tobacco and properly dried and cured is much less harmful than what's in a cigarette that you buy or shop.
It's funny. There's a guy that every time I'm in his company, he says that to me. He's trying to hand me a joint with tobacco in it, and every time without fail, that's his rhetoric. When it's like, "Aye, but this is," I'm like, "Nah, man, I'll no feel great after a joint. It makes me dizzy. I just fucking, you know." And it was like, and that's what he said. "Nah, but this is pure." And he started giving me this phenomenal marketing pitch behind his his particular tobacco. He's like, "I get it, but there's a certain guy and he cures it himself. This kind of shit." Like, whatever, man. That's funny. But funny that it's like what I was going to say was this might be a bit like esoteric / existential kind of thing, but because you're studying, I always find it fascinating the nature of existence through the whole like as is above so is below thing. So what you see represented on a micro scale is also relatively represented on a macro scale. Do you see anything like that when it comes to the cannabis plant, when you're looking at it and the microorganisms which exist and then how it displays itself, or even do you know how, like, I don't know, like just stick it to that.
Okay, I know the kind of question you're asking. It's not an easy one to ask actually or answer, but I think I get your point. And see if this is one like so. Okay, we talk about in the first part about the variation that comes from cannabis, right? And how that micro environment around each individual different part of the plant, whether it be in height or distance from the light or distance from the ground or distance from the, buffered from the wind, whatever it may be, those little kind of changes or influence in how that how that tissue expresses its genes. And that's slightly different each place. And then on top of that, as those grew out, those genes and those cells that make those different tissues, they start off as a common precursor, like a stem cell, and then differentiate into specialized cells that do specialized things like trichomes. So you have that differentiation pathway, and throughout that pathway, genes will be turned on and off, and then again with different stimulus around, external and internal. Some genes will express slightly more than others. It's not entirely coordinated from one budding site, let's say, to another. Right, so you've got all this kind of like very, very small variations in the gene expression and the microenvironment, and the combination of them both together can create a massive amount of variation. But again, it's small. It's because I always say, and just a side point, I always say, as part of the part of the drive for more flavors and tastes and potency, is partly got to do with our advanced ability to taste, because especially in the last 100 years, our taste buds have been really they've been globalized. Like everybody we used to all be stuck with regional food, and now we've all got access to global foods, and that means a wide range of flavors. So our generation, again, and the next generations down, we're surely increasing our palate, and developing that as a species as we go. So I wonder how much influence that has got to do with, this tastes like that and that tastes like that, and we prefer this to that. And anyway, that was just a little sidebar. But
no, that's good.
So you've got all this variation essentially coming from the same gene set, right? And then when it goes out, it becomes variable, and then it goes back into the consumer. It can kind of do the same thing no matter which variant it was. The overall might taste different, and might be slightly up or down a little bit more, but you get stoned or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
This reminds me of the kind of single conscious origin theory, where there was one solid conscience, and it wanted to divide itself to experience different things, and then basically we all return to that meta conscious as when we perish, right? And that it's the same kind of one thing expand into everything, but it's really only just back to one thing. Does that answer your question? Is that the kind of thing you mean?
That's exactly what I was meaning, because I was going to try and restrict it to only the plant, and then I was thinking maybe I should just ask how the impact or how it reflects itself through a societal lens. But you went fucking dynamite, Gary, and you've absolutely encompassed the entirety of it, man. Because that's one of the things I find interesting, like molecules, or I don't know if it's the right. When I'm like microorganisms kind of thing, I sometimes see the family unit almost as a representation and on a physical level that. So when you see the individual, you've got an individual that's born to a family. They get, if you were to watch all this from a bird's eye view, they then leave that house as an individual. They then follow like the life path. They meet an individual that's then one has turned into two, and then that two then obviously multiplies into four, and then blah blah. Then that same cycle recycles over and over and over. And there's that. Sometimes I think that to myself, the whatever dynamics going on like on the microcosm element of the cannabis plant, it will be represented on some way on the macrocosm, you know.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a really good one, and yeah, you see that, like, you know, the way that molecules interact, and as you say, one molecule then bind with another molecule, and they can then create a third molecule from that interaction. You know, like essentially, and yeah, so that is a really good one as well. And another one, like, it's not as fully formulated as the last one, but like, because it's taken a long time to like really. Because you say, I can say I understand it, but I don't really, if I'm really honest. The rhizosphere and the microbiome and how it interacts with the plant and how much that's influencing what the plant does. Like, this is a really fascinating area of study, and something I've dove into a few times. And I'm really, with cannabis, it's my conclusion. I've got my conclusion before I've got my evidence, right? So I must say that first. My conclusion is this: the microorganisms present in living soil, for example, right? I mean, you can look at it parasitically, you can look at it symbiotically, whatever way. So either they're doing something for their own good, or they're doing something for the benefit of both organisms, you know, both sets of organisms. I mean, it doesn't really matter if the outcomes they both thrive, right? It doesn't really matter. But I always think it's interesting because people talk about a synergy and symbiosis, not endosymbiosis. But really, for the bugs' point of view, for the microbes' point of view, I don't think they care.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because they could just be doing their best life, and that just happens to help the plant. You know, I don't think it's as clear as that. But anyway, that's just again another little sidebar. But you have this interaction, and what my conclusion is the plant is the bugs are able to sense cues from the plant, as we know, and the plant's able to sense cues from the bugs. And what ends up happening is that the plant is you can have the nutrients in the soil, but the access of those nutrients is questionable. You know, as the elemental nutrients can be in different forms, and you can feed them in different forms. You know, they can be attached to other molecules, they can be on their own, they can be in one state or another. And this is important because actually, when a lot of these things are transported throughout the plant, they will change, format, let's call it, to get through certain barriers and to get to certain different tissues. So sometimes there's a need for this ferment. So if you feed the plant the wrong thing and you're force feeding the plant the wrong thing, you're forcing it into doing that, whether it really needs to or not. And some people can balance that really well and nail it. But really, if you let the plant and the bugs dictate which nutrients is needed and what should be solubilized and which, ready for uptake and all that, then I think you get a much more balanced, plant. Like, that doesn't. I mean, it's not. I'm not saying good or bad. We're talking about examples of, kind of, and it's kind of. It reminds me of like all those different. Because again, I've done experiments with isolating. Here's one plant. It's completely sterile. It's this size, and I'm going to take this bacteria that's also completely sterile. It's just that bacteria. I'm going to inoculate it on a sterile plate, and I'm going to see what that does, right? And then I used a species called Burkholderia, and it made the plants grow bigger by 25% consistently, unless you over-inoculated it, in which case nothing happened. They just, there's too much bugs and not enough plant, and they just stayed where they were. But that was just one bug on one plant. It's completely sterile. Now you think about in a teaspoon of remember that old thing, if you've got a teaspoon of soil, you've got over 1 million different types of microorganisms.
Yeah.
So you've got all these things interacting in ways that are probably going to take a supercomputer to really understand, all the components, because I think it's beyond what we could chart out, and keep in our minds. So you've got all that complexity and all those different organisms, individuals, notwithstanding within any one species, right, or anyone even like clad, and they're all working at the root of this plant, and this plant is this one thing, right? And the cues are going both ways. It reminds me of basically everybody going to work and society is the finished product. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of that on a micro scale.
Yeah.
But again, that was not as fully.
No, that's brilliant, man. That's brilliant. But you saying everybody going to work, so I sometimes, in fact, one sec, I'm going to put the plug in, Gary. But 1 sec.
No worries.
Sorry about that.
That's right, mate.
No, that's a great example. You say that people going to the work and stuff like that. Because I do the same thing. There's a similar thing where it's like let's say what's represented on the low end will be explained explicitly. So sometimes I see the entirety of the human earth as like it's almost like a human body, if you think about it in that way, that each single one of us is an individual cell. We have an individual purpose. The thing that made me come up with this, and maybe at least think of it, was that when people ask, and why is there bad in the world, or why is there evil? I know that there's a balance and a spectrum necessary, but we're like, why is evil things happen and something like that? And I was thinking on this for a while, and I was like, but it's the same thing as like you have these specific parts of your body. What are they called? Some fucking which are 100% for. There's a word actually. One of the fuck man, there's a word and it's crucial. But it's essentially it's not like an enzyme, but there are essentially like cell basis that's that if you were to the whole thing is for about destruction and it's present in your body.
Macrophages.
I think that might be it. I think that might be it. And it's specific. So they're essentially, they would be interpreted as an evil thing because they seem to be serving nothing but a malevolent purpose. And in my mind, there's like in the same thing for the entirety of the human body that contains in that dynamic. And that's when people talk about as there, well, one consciousness, blah, blah, blah. Even though you've got like a billion odd cells, more than that, which are individually one, they're connected to one. They're connected to a unit, a unit of a mechanistic unit, which seems to be directional. Entropy, that kind of seems to be, and I just think that kind of thing where it's like it's like almost like because when you're talking about the cannabis plant, I know this is kind of getting a bit abstract, but when you're talking about the cannabis plant on the micro scale, it's kind of like there's like a geometric repetition that can be acknowledged on the micro scale, and it's the exact same repetition that's acknowledged on the macro scale. The only thing that's separating the two is existence. That's what it's kind of like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of like the Fibonacci sequence and that golden ratio, which is like a preserved number that plays out in all the kind of like plateaus of scale in nature. Like from the geometry of molecules, and maybe even again, it's hard as a bit more of a stretch, but I've even heard it mentioned in the pathways that the electrons take around the atom, for example, following certain rules, which there's no real reason why this number should be preserved throughout everything, and it is, and even on the kind of like universe scale, apparently there's ways to kind of show its presence, and so there's, I mean, when I had a couple of run-ins in academia with really traditional ways of thinking, and how, like, people said things to me like, well, if you can't prove it or measure it, then we can't assume that it exists. And my answer to that was always the same. It was always like, well, we all have a conscience, but yet we don't know where it is, what it is, where it sits. Tell me what the conscience is. Where is it in your, you know what I mean? And then it just shuts them up, because they know that that's true. They know they experience their own conscience, but they can't. Science hasn't yet goes, oh yeah, it's there. There it is. There, that's it. Like that's something it almost seems metaphysical, right? Like it's so.
I mean, he talks about that. He says that he's like, it's great about the psyche. He keeps referring to it as, and he's like, the psyche seems to be, because somebody asked him, that it's an interview on YouTube, actually, the guy asked him, he says about death, if death is an end, then, and he then finished the question, which escapes me now. And then Carl Jung was like, yeah, that's if death is an end. He says they were not sure. He says because it seems to be apparent that the psyche is not restricted to the same confinements that the physical body is. He says you notice this with people that have premonitions and they will see it in the future, or they have dreams and then things kind of come into reality, and or like you have a extrasensory perception of something and then it avoids instant death. These kind of things which are like, if there are no examples that I have offhand, but inevitably it would take very little time to find these, so it kind of, these give examples that the psyche isn't the same element as the physical body. Because sometimes, I mean, I've had conversations with individuals about that, and they say that it's like, oh, the brain, if you were to damage that part of the brain, then the consciousness kind of fades as a consequence of that. And sometimes I think to myself, like, we're all just like consciousness as a stream of information is kind of like plasticine, and every single one of us is a little different shape. And then it just depending on your shape of your biology, of your genetic makeup, will dictate the shape of the plasticine coming at the fucking end.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. But I mean, you're absolutely right. You're onto something there. The conscience and the mind, and yeah, sorry, you said something there, and it's kind of sent me into a spiral of thought.
Yeah,
I didn't expect that. In terms of like, I've lost it. I've lost it. I think I was something to do with you mentioned like, everybody. Yeah, that was it. So. Oh, two things actually. That's again, I usually get two things and then I get them muddled up. Right. Have you done any research on DMT at all?
Yeah, I'm familiar with it. I've taken it once, but I never got to the place that everybody tries to get to.
Right. Rodent studies have shown that some DMT is produced upon death from the brain. And that gets amplified into, when you die, you release DMT, right? But I don't think that's been proven in humans at all. But it might be true. But it's interesting because if you read how consistent the stories of people who experience DMT are, that's one thing. Like how consistent what they see is and what they describe is, that's one thing. But interestingly, like a lot of people who have taken it describe the early stages of like kind of light at the end of the tunnel and feeling like they're dying and like, and then when you see that the rodents produce this at the moment of death, it's like, well, okay, then. And then when people say, some people will describe the DMT as another realm, right? When you're on DMT, you're in a different realm and it feels like a different dimension, and it doesn't, and that makes sense to those who have done it, right? So if you take all that and we know that other physics, advanced physics have told us that other dimensions exist, maybe up to 12 or 13 different dimensions may exist beyond the 4 that we're, privy to. So, when you put those things together and you think, okay, your conscious is not a physical thing, but it's bound in the physical body, right? And if you damage that body, then it's still part of the, it's the vehicle for the mind. So it's going to affect the mind. Of course it is. In some parts more crucially than others, I guess. But then if you can die and people describe light at the end of the tunnel and they're hanging in this beautiful sensation of, and then people say take DMT and they describe the same thing. You put it all together and you say, well, is that how you get your conscious from the physical into whatever the next phase is, into the next realm, into the next dimension? Don't know, it might just be a comfort thing before the lights go out forever. You know what I mean? But that commonality is something I think that is starting to be explored now. But I think there's something there, like it's something, because again, all these things are organic, naturally occurring molecules, and such as the greatest poisons on earth. Like that's also, they could be say that, about those as well, and the worst, most debilitating drugs, I guess. Well, some of those have been synthetics actually, but
but no, just going back to that point, I find this stuff fascinating, Gary, and I think that's what it is. It's not, I'm kind of on a quest for like, it's just kind of happened to find myself on this path of trying to figure out what it is we're doing here. What are we connected to? What's the mechanisms? And the more and more I focus on the animations, and the more I draw, the more and more I focus on an individual point, the more that individual point becomes more complex. And it's really peculiar that the more and more I focus like on one thing, the more I'm learning from the external world, just as a consequence of doing this this craft, which would seem non-connected to the external world. And yet there are similarities that are explicit at the time when I'm doing it. And that's what makes me think. So I put up a post earlier on today, I think you've seen it actually, where it said the cushion of Donny, and I've got the alchemy book next to it. So alchemy, I think, is fascinating, mainly because it seems to be the methodological vehicle which connects all these things together. So the nature of alchemy, I don't know if you're familiar, is the art of transformation, where on the physical basis you're dealing with a rudimentary crude metal that's then going through a specific process to rid it of its crude metals to then form it into this pure essence of gold. So it's transforming the non-essential elements and then getting rid of it and becoming its true sense, its true essence, essentially. And that process seems to be consistent with the consciousness of the individual. And not only that, side point, when I was reading the book, in it, because it's just all about the history of Eastern, Western alchemical tradition, she goes into detail the fact that the Philosopher's Stone essentially would be the equivalent to a scientific method which consistently produces the essence consistently, and that's what your Philosopher's Stone is supposed to represent. So your Philosopher's Stone would be an individual that writes music, like a chart-topping music thing every fucking time. He's acquired physically the Philosopher's Stone. And interestingly, in this book, it wasn't always through alchemy. It wasn't always a stone. It was very often a tincture. And I was like, that's fucking funny. But if you think about cannabis as an extraction process, you've got the entirety of the whole biological organism. You go through an extraction process, which is getting rid of the secondary, unnecessary, undesirables, and what you're left with is a fucking explicitly displayed tincture. You know,
right? No, it's a really good point, and again, we can turn to our friends in the physics department to help validate to some extent this idea, because we know that atomic rearrangement can lead to, changing, one element into another. I think that's, essentially, even carbon and diamonds and, coal to diamonds, sorry, it's basically all just carbon, right? And that, so again, two thoughts going through my mind. So that's one thing. The other thing was that, I don't know if we mentioned this, because I always seem to mention this guy whenever I talk to anyone along these lines, is Graham Hancock.
No, you haven't, but he's awesome.
His ideas behind ancient civilizations, I think there's a lot of weight in that, and a lot it makes sense to me, both instinctually, but also from a kind of a logical point of view. And I genuinely believe that what you were describing could have been a form of technology lost. That kind of the old ways of alchemy or whatever. It could be a kind of a badly translated technology. Where it makes it sound like it's magic, or again maybe just people's understanding it. I mean, bear in mind that the things that blew people's mind, how many times has our minds been blown by technology? Every year for 20 years at least, and then but that must have also been true 100 years ago, right? What the fuck is the toothbrush? Do you know what I mean? Whoa! Do you know what I mean? It must go all the way down, all the way back to the first person picked up a stick, and then I goes, "What's that?" And I don't know. Clobber. It's a weapon. Do you know what I mean?
100%. And but even that though, when I look at that on a human race timeline, that chronological process from the fucking club to the toothbrush all the way through to where we are now, that is a macro representation of an alchemical process. That's what that's like. That you're fine tuning all the way down, and that's what makes me think about the reason I mentioned that about the DM was because we're talking about DMT, and personally, that's potentially what that could. Because I firmly believe alchemy, if you it represents exactly these fucking all of these different levels. That's the key to truly understanding these things, and that's only personally thinking, and that's what I think maybe is going on with the DMT thing, that we're disregarding, because that's what it is. When the individual, you've got a full biological entity, you then fucking consume this fucking thing, and it's got a psyche inside of it, and then you consume this chemical. That's the extraction process, and inevitably you disregard everything else, which is your physical, and all that's left is this this psyche, pure psyche, and then it's, you know what I mean? It just seems like it seems consistent.
But yeah, it does. The other way, I mean, that's just to keep it completely balanced. Okay. The other thing that psychedelic experiences are describable to anyone who's not done it is it allows your mind to explore your subconscious. Your abstract brain, the thing that doesn't order anything, and but everything means something, and that's the bit that I think is lost. I think when people, especially for therapeutic reasons, the great work that's been done with psychedelics, I mean, I think in my mind, they've overtaken cannabinoids in terms of showing effectiveness at the clinical end of things. And some of the one dose treatments as well. And don't come back. Well, maybe not one dose, but one dose a year or a month, or every X amount of months is so much better than 4 pills a day. You know what I mean? But some of that work, I mean, I think it's, if you do it right and it's explained to you what's going on, in this term, it's just to give a balance to we could be going to another dimension.
No, definitely.
could just all be internal, which, you know, and what it does is it shows you things, some things you're ready to deal with, some things you're not ready to deal with. Some things are going to take a long time to figure out. But the point of it is, if you don't go all the way in for 6 hours long and you have now lived eons in another realm, right? Like, that's a lot to unpack. Right. But like, if you can have a small piece of that and then really spend a lot of time understanding what you were shown, right? It nearly in every single case works out to be something really personal that you had to deal with, and it helps you become a better version of who you are. You know, and that again, it's like, it kind of sounds like you know, that movie Limitless, right? But some of the things that you hear about psilocybin, especially being like, you know, everything was enhanced. I could hear better. Everything was clearer to see. You know, I mean, I just knew what to do. These kind of things, like, it really makes me think it's an instinct. It's tied to the psyche, and it's tied to the, you know, when you get to understand your, or not, you can't understand it, but when you get to explore your abstract mind, and you get to understand, oh, it's all a lesson. There's nothing happens in that experience that's not worth dissecting and seeing what that actually meant. You know what I mean? Like, that's a key thing for anyone looking for wellness in that direction. I think is like the analysis of what you experience is where the work is done. You know, you can have big say it for me, please.
Epiphanies.
Yeah, you can have those. And you know, I mean, throughout, but actually when you actually detail, you know, some of the things that you're showing, I think that's when you really understand. You're like, right, okay, so that's actually about my selfishness in this area, you know, or whatever.
I really like that as well. Yeah, no, I really like that as well, and I think that's what's interesting. That the thing that makes me really intrigued about it is the imagery, the symbolic representations. Like, that's what makes me, because I'm the same. It's like, if you want to try and get a much more insightful analysis of actually truly what's going on, try and get cross-cultural analysis, because then you're getting a bit more of a variance kind of thing. And it's interesting when you got like a cross-cultural analysis that seems to point to the same conclusion, or at the very minimum the same symbolic representation. So Carl Jung does that with his mandalas, when he had numerous patients from like all across the world, and yet they would be drawn mandalas from their dreams and these kind of things that would be symbolically similar, and they would have no connection with each other, which kind of tells me, sometimes I think, it's like, well, that's like one of two things. You're either opening a door and accessing something that's fundamentally true, or the very deep recesses of the psyche, there are templates which will be maybe represented in some form of, like, I have no idea, like some form of molecular form that's displaying itself through a symbolic representation. But that seems like it's like the second part. It seems like it can't, these symbolic images can't be like, when there is consistency cross-culturally, it seems to point there is either something within the psyche, or at the very minimum where the psyche can access, that seems to be similar. And that's where I've tried to put it in my brain, where it's like, what is it? Like, is it, you know?
Sorry, can I just interject with that? I think I know what you're talking about, and there's a very succinct example, I think.
Right.
And it's like, if you've done a lot of reading in the DMT journals, you'll probably have come across an entity or a character that's called the jester. Right? Someone who appears very early on and can often play tricks and do things to spook you out. Right. Now, all that kind of fun stuff aside, like, think about the purpose. If this is, well, it actually works for me. It works in both examples. If it's something external that you're going to a different plane or realm or dimension, then it's a gatekeeper, right? Is basically testing if you're ready to go through. You know, and if he'll do something to freak you out, if you freak out, you're not getting through. Right. You know, he's a bouncer, right? But that could also be true for your mind. As you say, if the construct of everyone's mind starts off from the same seed, but, you know, through experience, the vessel we're in and the dynamics of where we, you know, everything else, then your mind is changed over time, and you become an individual, because it's impossible for two people to have exactly the same experience, right, throughout their life. Even for a moment, actually, it's quite impossible. But so if that's true, then, you know, when we go back to the research, the kind of the rudiments of our psyche, which if you're going into your abstract mind, I guess is possible. I mean, it's some suggest there's even things in there like your repressed memories of inside the womb and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Which I can't verify. I'm not well versed enough in neuroscience to say if that's true or not, but I've heard it being said, you know. But if those, you know, in those elements, if it's all started from the same thing, then in order to access certain levels of it, maybe there is a psychological barrier that will not allow your conscious element to enter should it not be ready. You know, and it makes sense, right? Especially if it's all natural, that we are talking about these natural elements that seem to enhance humans and probably a lot of other animals as well. There's another thing we should talk about at some point is that, you know, animals who prefer fermented rotten fruit because it makes them drunk and things like that, you know, because, you know, there's a tendency in nature actually towards intoxication, which if it's in our DNA and it's, you know, at some point we've got to say, well, it's not bad. Do you know what I mean? It's, you know, drugs are bad and cake. You know, at some point we've got to say, well, you know, anyway. So, but there, if the fundamental aspects of your mind are the same, but it works in both parallels. That the character of the jester, right? It's either an entity who's external and plays the same role in everybody's, you know, experience, or it's part of the fundamental core of your makeup, and it's, you know, it's a kind of gatekeeper element of your psyche that prevents you from, you know, crashing out. I mean, it happens. That's why, you know, people who have experimented with acid, LSD, that concentrated forms of psychedelics and really bad or heavy experiences, you're going to push yourself through that barrier regardless by taking over a certain amount, you know. And as much as people say breakthrough doses are important, I actually think a lot of the kind of, like, you know, micro doses and up towards the kind of breakthrough doses, I think that's a really important area that's under explored. Actually, at the clinical level, that's actually been explored a bit more. But as far as people who, you know, because psilocybin's been allowed for sale in California and I think Colorado now and Oregon, and, you know, so people are getting access to this, and it's going to be really interesting. Someone, it was like maybe a few years ago now, but someone said we're on the edge. I think it was maybe Graham Hancock, but someone said we're on the edge of a new spiritual age. And with the research being done on these natural, you know, substances, I think that could be true.
And it's perfect you'd say that, actually, because I a couple of days ago I was having a conversation with somebody, and I remembered, I was like, oh yeah, that's fucking so I was thinking about the same thing, and I was thinking about more in the context. I was thinking about it in the more context of my own mania that I was experiencing a couple of years ago, right? Just insane fucking streams of information. Where I was just like, what the fuck? And it's only in retrospect when I can acknowledge it as that, because at the time I just thought I was fucking busy. That's about it. But and I was thinking about that. I was like, what has been going on here, man? I was like, an evolution displays itself in pockets. That's what it's this. And we went through a physical evolution to a point where it's no longer it seems to be no longer a factor. So what's the secondary stage? A psychological / social evolution. So you're going to see pockets of specific ways of thinking, which, I mean, it would have been represented, like you say, with the Age of Enlightenment, and then before that, there's like we said before, as the seasons come and go with winter, all that kind of stuff, summer, spring, you'll have that same dynamic on a social scale. And I think that that's what you'll see, this you know, geometric repetition of thought. And I think that's maybe what we're experiencing is like a precipice of our one. That's what this is, you know.
It's funny because when I was traveling through California, which was just like, it was phenomenal, man, like in all sorts of ways. But one of the things I got to experience was like places who were founded by entire like hippie communities, like old school 60s hippie communities. You know, they move up into the north of California and they basically just settle there. And like the attitudes, the way of life, just everything is just so, it just made sense, you know. But the reason why I'm bringing that up is actually, like, when you look at this idea of a commune, right, it gets bad press a lot. Communes are where, like, you know, you get people who start what those things, cults, you know, things like that, right? And it's always got this kind of shadow of, but actually, like, that whole thing became really big in like the 60s, right? And that was the first modern spiritual, you know,
psychedelic wave, really.
Yeah. And then again, it's like, it's maintained. There's still that element, you know, it's starting to get more popular again there. And even if you just take that as a kind of isolated example of like a kind of You know, where are we at? You know, the fact that there's more people, you know, living in communes again, kind of, you know, would suggest that we're, because I think that's a really important element, that you live sustainably off the land, and each person has a role that directly is important for the life of everyone else. You know what I mean? Like that, there's something for me. Like, I don't know. Maybe I'm just jaded by modern ways a lot. Like, but for me, there's something like beautiful about that kind of existence, where you don't have a constant pressure to be somewhere for 40 hours a week, and you don't have to pay this guy this money for this thing that's essential to life. Like, you know, like at some point, we lost our way in what's important. Do you know what I mean? That's my, you know, and especially when like. And not that I've got a solution to this, but at some point I would suggest that you can't have, as you say, everything changes, right? At some point, the capitalism model is no longer fit for purpose, because it's just more of the same, right? And as you say, for everyone to have a chance to get to that, you know, to better them. I don't mean like in terms of like social class. I'm talking about in your mind, better yourself, be a better version of yourself, is the way I like to say it. You know, that you need a certain amount of freedom. Do you know what I mean? Like those, you know, I did it when I was an undergrad. I had 3 jobs, and I had, you know, 4 hours of sleep, and I was, you know, you don't know yourself.
Yeah,
you can't possibly know yourself when you've no time to explore yourself. You know what I mean? Like you're just constantly going. You can't, you know, you can't know yourself.
It's actually perfect, because it's Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs comes to mind, where it's like the self-actualization, and it's like the fundamental basis of that is food, shelter, water, and then you're moving up that ladder, and it's social influence, and then you're moving up that, and then it's like intimate relationships, and then you get to the very top, and then you get to concentrate on essentially what you were here to do, you know.
I purpose, like like people call it a calling or something. It's something I've actually been working on myself, is like instinct, right? Like everyone has an instinct, a gut feeling, whatever you want to call it, but like, you know, you could just draw a line through it and go, yeah, 50% of the time it works out, 50% of the time it doesn't. Just toss a coin, it's the same difference, right? You could say that, but you could also say, well, instinct is clearly influenced by desire and by fear, right? Would that make sense to you? Like, you know, like if, you know, because you know, oh, I want that. You've got like a buzz, an instinct to get it right, and like, oh shit, you know, I need to get out of here. That's an instinct based on fear. But actually, to be my whole thing right now is like, okay, that's every time you need to use your instinct, or you have a feeling coming, just like always be aware: is this fear driven? Is it desire driven, or is it pure? And what I've found so far is that if you can eliminate both of those elements, then you'll have a true gut feeling, and that's way more powerful than 50-50 so far. And again, it might just be, you know, not that I'm doing it in any kind of like measured way to keep track of it, but it's obviously just my subjective experience. You know, but that's something that I think is really important that we've lost. And if you're too busy all the time and you're caught up in everything, you can't possibly tap into your instinct. I mean, you might show up and you might be, you know, you might dodge a few bullets here and there in certain things. And one of the things that was pointed out to me in California is that instinct is birthed by choice, and more importantly, by choice at a very early age, from the start. So if you're brought up in a place where you can choose what to do from the age of like, you can talk, you know, good or bad, you can choose, you know, those people apparently are way more instinctual over time than the people who get told what to do. And it makes sense, right? It makes sense. Go follow that. You're closing down your ability to absorb and react, and you're just following suit. And that, I think that's where we've got to, is just like a kind of just a process of just, you know, so many jobs. I just don't know why they need to exist. Do you know what I mean? And yeah, I don't know. It just, you know, we went really deep here, Connor.
No, that's my subscribers probably hate me for this, man. I fucking love this kind of shit. No, that's what I think's fascinating about the animating process, though. Again, Gary, that whole the microcosm represents the macrocosm. I'm exhausted myself saying it, but that's animation has truly shown me, and alongside the drawing, like every format. I think that's why I'm getting such I would say, a relatively intuitive sense towards a lot of these topics, because I'm engaged with them and not really meaning it. But animation from the ground up, it's like I've got this thing where I'm actually doing this book over the course of 10 years, and it's called Philosophy of an Average Man, and it's just me doing. It's kind of like tipping my hat to Marcus Aurelius, where it's like there'll be intuitive statements that will come to my mind that will kind of that I would just write it down, kind of thing. And one of the things that I wrote was that complexity is birthed from simplicity, and that's what it seems to be. That you've got this really simplistic basis that kind of, and then you've got complexity that's burst on top of it. And animation showed me that really explicitly. But I know you're probably going to hate to go, man. So
I'm fine actually for now. But
excellent.
We can. I mean, again, I'd love to talk to you just at any time, just to shoot the shit. You know what I mean?
Share a joint or something, man. That'd be quality. Exactly. But I just to
where are you based? I mean, obviously this bit's cut out, but where are you based?
I'm in Fife. I'm in Cooper.
Oh, right.
Where are you? You still in Glasgow?
No, I'm way down south now, man. I stay just outside Cheltenham, but
right. Well, I'm hopefully that my intention, my intention is to pull as many people in as possible to see this stuff. But once the movie's ready, the movie is I'm hoping to have it screened at Product Earth. So yeah. I mean, I'm really hoping, because I mean, Matt Clifton, he said it would be cool. There's a documentary getting shown, and I'm also hoping because I'm going to have it ready for the beginning of May, and then I'm going to get in contact with that I've got sent over from the Fringe production team. I got sent over 8 different locations, so and I'll have to get in contact with them personally to see if they can screen it there. But I'm going to attempt to, because that's what I mean. You're talking about shitty jobs. I'm starting a shitty kitchen assistant job on Monday, right? And it's just washing dishes all day. But my intention is to do it. It's like 30 hours a week, which will take me away from the craft. But these things are inevitable. And is to put the money from that into marketing it so that people show up and all these different things. But yeah, man, and that's what I mean about the numerological basis of a lot of these things. That I'm 33 this year, and then I started the movie last year, and then 33 is a really significant number when it comes to a lot of these different things. And I'm only discovering it as I'm walking through it. It's fucking peculiar as anything, man. Honestly,
I had a friend of mine. His wife actually was like, introduced me and said she was into like a certain type of astrology.
Right.
I was like, I'm not dismissive of these things, because, like I say, I'm very aware that there's things we don't know how to measure, so we can easily dismiss. But anyway, she was like, oh, I'm going to do this thing, and then she was doing these birthing charts or something like for everyone, and I was like just looking at it. She came round to me and she said, do you want to do it? And I was like, sure. Yeah. And then blah 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 blah. And long story short, it blew my mind actually, and not because it was the I'm very well aware of the kind of generalizations and stuff that can be used to kind of sway you. It was but there was something like 6 people there or something, and each of them had a chart with 6 sections, and each of them had the 6 sections all had something in them, and 2 of my sections had nothing in them. So she was just reading it, and I was like, "You never mentioned that," and I was like, "Tell me why did they have nothing in them?" Because that was the thing that stood out to me. Yeah. And then when she told me what that could mean, she said, I don't know, it could mean this. I was like, just right on the head, like, fuck. She didn't know me to know the things that she said was actually accurate. And it was like, that's really just like, it was just like, I can't believe that actually just happened, like, and again, it makes me always like, just always be open, like it's so easy just to go, no, that's a load of shit, you know what I mean? But there's a lot of things.
That's what's good about you having a scientific background, but still having a general, very open-minded approach to metaphysicality, because I think that's what that openness, because we do have that confirmation bias thing inevitably as subjective creatures. But I'm the same as you. I mean, I'm a huge fan of the I Ching, and that is, I don't know if you know much about that, but that's the best. That's like a really explicit representation of these things that we're describing, where you're in a position. I mean, that the I Ching, do you know much about the I Ching? No.
Oh, so one of my mates is he's quite a spiritual person. We've spoke about it quite a few times.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know how you feel about that, but I think that's fascinating, the way it's able to, and it's also the very first binary code as well, which is thinking about the history behind it and stuff. It's like, yeah, so I had the same thing when I was a teenager. I mean, that's kind of a side point about the I Ching, but I had the same thing as a teenager. Like all of us, like I took fucking like loads of drugs, all that kind of shit. But by this age, I hadn't, right? So I was 16 when this happened. My mum did the same. My mum was getting this fucking breathing done, and I was the same, 16 years old. Look, you can imagine, it's pain in the arse, all that kind of shit. So it was like, And I remember I was doing the high street. She was getting this thing done at the top of the street, and it was my first example of this kind of thing. I was like, "What the fuck is this?" So I walked up to the high street, went into the building that she was getting it done. I'm sitting there at the top of the stairs, and it's just a group of people. I didn't know them, obviously. They were waiting to go in, and then she came up the stairs behind the guy that gave her the reading, and the guy walked straight over to me, right? And he was like, "Go and give me your hand." And I was like, "What?" And he was like, "Go and give me your hand." And I was like, I handed my hand up, and he turned my hand around and fucking smacked my hand, right? And he was like, "Stay away from all the drugs," like that, right? Now, the reason I'm saying this is because I was only 16. I had only smoked cannabis then. And what, let's say, I'm no detailing anything like that, but what followed over the next 3 years was nothing short of completely out of character for the time I was at 16. But what he described, and it wasn't until I was in 21, 22 that I'd look back and it all clicked. I was like, "What the fuck? That was weird, man," because it was bizarre, like bizarre, crazy film shit. And then he was like, and that's why I was like, "That's so bizarre." And loads of them's happened since, like loads of instances of synchronistic events that it's only because it's like you're watching life in real time. That's when it becomes noticeable.
Yeah, it's funny that you mention it like that, because that's exactly what I experienced in a place called what's it called, Sebastopol in Sonoma County in California.
Right.
Was just like, and it was in, dude, it was like, we in Scotland, I get wee glimpses of it, and it takes us 15 years to realise what happened, right? There, it's just in the air. They just openly talk about it. They told me, like, if you need something, you'll just get it. And I was like, what the fuck are you talking about, crazy hippies? Yeah. And honestly, dude, you would just turn the corner, there'd be a guy, "Oh, I've not seen you in 5 years." "Oh yeah, by the way, I've got some of this thing." And we're like, and then they don't bat an eyelid, and I'm like, "What?" And they're like, "I told you, man." And I told you, man. It's just like, it's not a big deal. It's just, and you know, a lot of these people are living like, you know, like we say, they're not all living in communes, but you know, a lot of them are. A lot of that community does live like that kind of life, if you know what I mean. It's not. You don't need to call it a commune and have like all these different people dancing around and, you know, whatever. You know, it's just like they're very functional, capable, intelligent people. You know, but they're living a really good way of life. You know, and it's like it's an affluent area, of course, as well. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's.
Well, I share that sentiment though about like what you ask, what you'll get for, and that's what I think's really interesting about. There's a lot of these fundamental truths that are laced through established religious texts, and that's what I think's frustrating, because there's a lot of fundamental truths that are in established religious texts, but there's like geographic control, and then years that have managed to fucking dilute these messages as a consequence of maintaining control over the demographics. But that's I do that with the channel, Gary. I'm like, the whole thing of the channel. I mean, if I was to briefly fucking, I'm going to cut this out because I'm sure there's like other viewers would hate this shit, most of this conversation. But just because I talk about it all the time, I can't help it. But it's like, but the thing with the channel, like I spoke this shit, man. Like I got a bizarre. I was like, my son was born, and it felt like I was 23, and I would be saying to the boy's mum, "I didn't need a job. I'm just going to get stoned, sell green, all that kind of shit. I'm no bothered. You can the type of person at that age." So I was like, "Fuck, I'm not leaving the house. I'll just do this shit." And then my son was born at 24, and I had like a transition, to say the least. I got to about 20. By the time I was about 25, I started having this over. Now, at the same time, in my periphery, I'm drawing books from my partner's other son. He was really young at the time, so I'm drawing like kids' books and just doing this art thing, and just to make him think I'm shit hot. So I was like, "I'll do kids' books for you, and that'll be quality. You'll think I'm shit hot." And then it was like that all fell into place at the right time, and I got to 25, 26, and I started getting this manic fucking. That's all I could describe it as. This manic like insight, this bizarre, like, "You better get busy." And I kept referring to her. I was like, it's like there's a bus waiting for me, and it's up to me how much luggage I take on the bus. And the luggage is a metaphor for how much of the craft I pursue. And that's what it feels like. It feels like, so the more and more I engage, and that's why the more and more I stumbled across this way of thinking, the more information was given to me that I was able to use and move forward with. And one of the things was about language, and about how you've got to really articulate your speech. Language is frequency orientated, and it'll instigate a magnetic resonance with the external world. So you have to speak your future and all these different things. So to wrap it up, essentially, I was like 26, 27, and I was saying to her, I'm going to create an animation series. I'm going to do this. I'm going to have this. I'm going to do all that shit. I hadn't even made a comic. I'd never made one comic book series, man. And I was telling her, I was like, I'm going to do an animation series. It's going to be biggest in Scotland. It's going to be like Family Guy, blah, blah, blah. And then you fast forward, man, and it's all right here. And all I did was I just kept doing the discipline, kept engaging with the principles that seem to be relevant to the craft, and it's all just arriving, just like magic, man. Like magic is real, and it's like it just arrives. And I think that's why I think hardly any people engage with this, because it's all sacrifice, it's all discipline, it's all fine-tuning yourself to a specific point where all you're doing is you're only ever in the engine. You're only ever putting coal in the engine and keeping in the fucking. Because I'll be honest, I often get fear that I'm going to lose this feeling. I get fear that I'm going to stop hearing it. It's bizarre. It's really peculiar. But yeah, and that's why I just, let's say, the more and more I'm doing this thing, when especially like this time last year, I didn't know how to animate. Like it's just all like each domino's knocked itself. Like it's really bizarre, and that's what takes me to the movie this year, and it's just.
Look, dude, it's an amazing body of work, man. As you say, perseverance, staying in the pocket, it's really important, and to see it through even this far is amazing.
Really appreciate that, man.
Don't sell yourself short on that. It's a shoot. I do have a little bit of understanding of the effort that goes into these things, having walked a little bit of the pathway, and but yeah, man. And also, like I said before, I'm a music guy, so I burn a lot of time in that element for the craft, and I do everything, like from singing to drums.
I was going to ask you, do you sing? Because I listened to your stuff on Instagram. I didn't. I was going to ask you, do you sing? It's fucking shit hot, man.
Cheers, man. I've got an album out. It's the same name, the Godstar Paradox. You should check it out. Actually, we maybe tag it in the description or something.
I'll definitely do that.
It's really weird. I've been able to really quickly for the first time in 20 years or so, like I actually felt, oh, this is good enough. I can release it, right? So I released it last year during the summer, and after sitting on it for like 18 months, just not doing anything, just like don't know. Okay, fuck it, I'll just do it. And now I've got over that. It's great. I've got another album ready to go. Do you know what I mean? It's just like, let's get this shit out now. But actually getting over that barrier, getting it out. The problem I've had is like just nobody goes and listens to the album. Like I've done like some stuff on Instagram to generate and I've had like sometimes hundreds of thousands of clicks, views and stuff, but it's just not translating into anything on the music side. I just don't know. I have no idea how to get over that barrier because I'm just one guy, and I put all the music together, I did all the mixing, did all the mastering, and then even the artwork, I designed all the artwork and stuff like that. So then you send it, right now, release it. Fuck it, I'll do that myself as well. Release it, and then just like, oh shit, right now I've had an incompetency step. Now I've reached the limits of what I can do. So I've always been really shy. I never liked social media.
Yeah, I was
like I never engaged it. I never had a Facebook. I never had any of that shit. And then when I launched the album, I was like, I'm going to get some freelancers in India to do some basic marketing. And they set up a few things for me, but it wasn't really worth the money in the end. It wasn't expensive. They were charging like £6 an hour for two of them, and they were doing a few hours a week.
Right. But no, I know that feeling when you say you're just one guy, because I'm the same. Like I'm on episode 5 of the season 2 of the animation series. So that's like and there's 7 episodes in the first series, so that's like I'm working on episode 12. Each one of them's like 7 minutes long. There's also like 39 couch skits, which are each 2 minutes long. You know what I mean? That's like a fucking significant amount, and yet the amount of views I get, I'll spend a month working on one of them, on one of the and interestingly as well, like I don't know where it is actually. This, I don't know if you can see this, but all the animations are like done for there. So that there is like they're all the comic books.
Wow.
So animated all the like season 1 and season 2 are from there's 14 original comic books that I did. That was when I was saying to the boys' mum, like, I'm going to create a comic book series that I'll then put into an animation series, and the animation series is going to get picked up. It's going to be fucking massive when the cannabis becomes legal and all that kind of shit. And that's what. So I'm on like number 11, like episode 11 of the comics, which have been this. So essentially I've done what Stan Lee did, but just he got Jack Kirby to draw them. And that's how I see it. My brother, I said to my brother, he's a chemist, his name's PhD in chemistry, and he went, so you think you're better than Stan Lee? Like, nah, man, but fuck, come on, there's similarity there.
No, 100%, man. And and that's it. But at some point, you're going to make the right connection, and it's going to be, you're going to fill in those other elements and get to where you need to be. But I would say, man, it sounds like a very organic path that you found. And just keep following it. Don't worry about that thing disappearing. That again, that's just your instinct's been influenced by fear. Yeah. And in this case, it's your instinct is your instinct. You know what I mean? Like it's which is crazy.
That's how it feels. I'm not joking, man. Like I feel like that. Like I'm not joking, Gary. I have no idea. This is never off ever. And I used to at the beginning. I used to think I'm losing my shit. But actually, in the past couple of years, I've realized I'm finding it. That's what's going on here, man. I'm really finding it. But I find myself when you're saying my instinct's fearful of its instinct. It's like I find do you know when you get like a bubble and you pop it to the other side? That's what it feels like. That's what I feel like I am. But yeah, that's why like the marketing thing and all that. Like I do believe like magic's a real thing. You speak, future begins at the tip of your tongue, and that's why like it's like a weird thing because I'll be honest, I don't have a feeling of accomplishment, really. I feel more like it's like because my initial starting point was to say I'm going to have an internationally recognized animation series that's as well known as The Simpsons and Family Guy. And I think when you set a goal of any form, the bare minimum you can do is meet the goal. That's the bare minimum. So I think because I've not met the goal yet, in my mind I'm like, do you know what I mean? It's like if you're going to say I'm going to build a house and you build like like you're like. The minimum you can do is get some fucking walls and a roof together. Like that's the minimum. So even though some people will be like, "Hey, you well done," you're like, "Nah, but that was the minimum that I set myself." You know.
Aye, and then I mean the same's reflected with the music as well. At one point, I said, okay, if I can do for someone what my influences did for me, you know, like in terms of like, there's a couple of one bodies, one album that just like, you know, is everybody's got it, something of an album that's just like, wow, that one, or you know, several albums that just changed your, probably changed the way you thought, changed the way who you were in a certain sense. And I just had this idea. I was like, yeah, I'd love to. Some of my friends dig my music in that way, right? They say, honestly, man, like I hold it in the same regard as any artist I've got in my, you know, and that's fine. But they're my friends, so I always take it with a bit of you know. But when I eventually put the album out, and it's only happened like 3 or 4 times, people have reached out and just goes, that was epic, you know, like, and just total strangers and just a little bit of detail about, you know, this and that while I was going through whatever, and you're just like, whoa. And then I'm like, so I kind of feel, because I've not, I used to have aspirations of being a full-time musician, and I was for a wee while, as I said, but like, you know, to write music and create that music and then use that as a vehicle for payment, that would be great, because it would allow me to spend all my time doing it.
Yeah.
But it's not why I'm doing it now. I'm not doing it to make a living. So like, I almost feel with that first release, that album, like, as long as so how I can reach one person, you know, and I've had a couple of people come back to me, and hopefully we've met them on the level that I'm assuming. That's my job. I think I feel that box is ticked, and it's okay now. I've got the confidence to release more music, because I kind of made, that was a very small goal. Do you know what I mean? Like, I always keep those for me. I think your goal was big, and I think you should chase it down, because you're making actual, you know, tracks towards it. Mine was much more. Looking back again, you don't know as you're going through, but it was just a journey of self-discovery, and you know, and to a point where, you know, because that was actually something I did want to put on camera, was the Godstar Paradox album is really all about the combination of science, psyche, and the cosmos, and you can really like articulate how the psychedelic influence comes out, especially lyrically in that music. So it's kind of like a stoner psychedelic rock album, but a little bit more. I call it an ambient metal album. That's elements in metal, but it's all kind of very on the kind of chilled. It doesn't get like, a lot of my other stuff was way angrier, you know, because it's kind of more rocky, less metal, but angrier. Do you know what I mean? Just in your face, punch the doors down. Songs called things like 95 and Consequences, and you know, he's just a young fucking angry guy full of spunk, like you know, just you need to get an outlet. And so a lot of that stuff was really aggressive and fast, and now it's just kind of chill and big. But the whole thing, like, I always try and the one thing I would try and sell about the album was, you stick on start to finish headphones, especially, like, light up a spliff, and just that's your next 45 minutes. You'll probably come away from it feeling pretty good. Do you know what I mean? It is a journey. The songs are purposely in a certain order, and it's, you know, it takes you right up, drops you down, and flies you to the moon to get out. You know, like, that's essentially what I always try to do with the arc of the album. And that's good. So
sorry, on you go. What I was going to say was, that's actually, I was going to ask you that about what you did with the album, because like, my most favorite thing when I was a kid, and it seems to be not as present with contemporary music, but I might just be out the fucking loop, was a story that you were dealing with. Again, you've got individual songs, which are again, boring as fuck, the micro, but you've got a macro direction on that album, and that's what, like, you're taking them on a journey, and that's what you did.
Yeah, exactly. Like, so the first song's called Abstract. You know, that's the first thing you read on a scientific paper, right? Because it's like, it's not a song; it's a prelude to what's coming. It's the rocket that gets us into space. Do you know what I mean? Like, and then the first song lands as Awaken, because that's, you know, that song is like, articulates exactly who I am, and you know, that's the essence of me is lyrically in that song. Awaken, right? Because that's the why we hear the boom, you know. And again, it gets abstract, especially near the end. But I always try and have at least two halves to a song, but sometimes three parts, where you have like a kind of a contrast in the mood. See, like ballads, love songs, feel good, whoa, I'm rocking on sunshine. Those fives have all been explored to death, I feel. So I'm always trying to get like those other emotions and those other kind of feelings and those ones that go from one thing to another. Because that's reality. Everything is in a state of transition. It's never fixed. I didn't want to play with those, those same old storylines that everybody plays with. So I was like, well, what can I talk about? And I was like, well, I like science. I like the cosmos. I like exploring my own existence, like, you were talking about earlier. And then when I really started to put those elements together, I was like, whoa, I've got a lot to say about this, And then when you throw the psychedelic element into it, that's really the thing that threads it all together. There's a song in there called Function of One. And I always thought it was about the kind of resisting, the malcontent, as I often kind of feel myself being, in many ways. I thought it was about that. But actually, when I, again, went in there and I was listening to the album, I was like, fuck, that song's entirely, every single word, every single way through that song is about me and my immediate family.
Right.
Because I was brought up with my granddad.
Right.
And so that creates a different dynamic from a typical, so when I'm talking about my mom and my sister and stuff like that, it's like that song is really entwined, and I just didn't know I did not know I was writing about that.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So again, and I wouldn't have understood that if it wasn't for those for psilocybin plus THC.
Yeah.
But it's just like, as I was saying, I was trying to say it earlier, and I didn't want to be too forward with it. But that's how you take a little snapshot of your subconscious and then you dissect it. Yeah. So if it's something small like the music thing, I'll just make a quick note and laugh, and then I'll go back in. But if it's something big, like, that song's about your family, and here's what this line means, and here's what this line means, and you're just going poof, 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 you know what I mean? Like, shit, you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's fascinating because I've got like I grew them a couple of years ago. I'm sure it'll still be fine. But I've got maybe 3 or 4 grams of psilocybin in the freezer, and I've been kind of dipping in and out my mind. Because like I've just not been at like, and I don't know if it's that. Essentially, the thing that's been, but it's fear that's getting in the way. But I was contemplating taking, because I took it the other night, but I was like, fuck it, just had a smoke. But I was contemplating taking a gram, and then essentially, because it's on the computer, that's the thing that's putting me off. But like writing some of the script for the movie, because I'm thinking about how much more the movie would be expanded upon as a consequence of the psilocybin. But a side point though, I don't know if you're going to go soon, Gary, but when you're doing the music, what is it you think's going on? Like, 'cause I know it's frequency, I know it's sound. What do you think's it? Because I mean, you're affecting the central nervous system of the consumer essentially. So what's going on?
Dude, I'm glad you asked that question, and I'm definitely happy to talk about this in front of everybody. The game, I genuinely feel like I don't write any music. I genuinely feel that I find it. Like a lot of it started, as we spoke about before, growing up where we grown up, you're exposed to cannabis. Let's not pretend, right?
Yeah.
So I found that whenever I had consumed cannabis, I was just like, I could just write songs, right? And I would always call it writing songs. I was like, I get someone to write songs, right? But actually what I realized was I don't write songs, I find them. They usually when I create a song, it already exists by the time I've stumbled upon it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And it's like an archaeologist finding a bone. I'm just brushing away the dust.
Yeah, I can't blast.
You know what I mean?
Sorry.
Aye. So yeah, I guess that you've got a similar thing going on with your.
That's how I described it. That's how I described it to the boy's mum. That the ideas, because when I'm doing that, I'm the same. I'm like quote unquote writing the scripts. I'm thinking of the stories. I've got the storyboard. So there's that breakdown process, and that's what I said to the boy's mum. I was like, I'll be honest. It feels like I'm not doing this. I don't feel like the author of these things. I feel like I'm allowing myself to be in a psychological position where I can funnel it or channel it, and that's what it feels like. It feels like there's an information thing that's constantly available. And I think that's one of the things that I was thinking about it earlier, but I didn't say, that it makes me question the nature of technology when you've got people like they're playing Call of Duty at the time and it's like 5-second respawn, like it seems to be that there is a malevolent element of technology that is getting in the way of our ability to intuit that process. Because if you put a screen in front of somebody when they're trying to intuit these ideas, the screen gets in the way. It steals the place of the consciousness. And that's what makes me sometimes question it. I was like, because there's an invasiveness of consciousness, of technology in our life, and it's increasing. There's an increasing invasiveness, which makes me think that's going to be counterpoint to the ability for ideas. And I know that you've made like AI art and stuff like that, but I'll be honest, I fucking hate AI art. I don't hate anything, right? But you know, when I see it, it feels cold. It feels like it's empty. There's like there's something missing inside of it. That's just my perception, obviously. But genuinely, I'm the same though, Gary. It's like when I'm looking for like. It's not like looking for ideas is the best way I describe it. I'm looking for them. I'm not like I'm not coming up with these things. It's just it arrives on, you know.
Yeah, the other way I describe it is like I stick my hands in the ether and I pull something out.
Yeah,
you know, and then the idea is, as you say, the vehicle. Then what's my job? My job is to try and take this down, can dust all the, fix it all up, and then throw it back up. And that's the bit I hadn't been doing, was throwing it back. That's what I did with this album. I threw it back up. And there's one thing that you can say what you want about the process, the fact that we've got the same understanding of the process, I think it's genuinely a sign that you're doing honest work, genuine work. It's not forced. It's not purpose. It's not it's not that it lacks purpose. Do you know what I mean? That means, I think that means that you're doing something that's either important to you or, or something much greater than that, probably. So yeah, it's really interesting that you've got that same understanding of it.
It's actually comforting, to be honest, Gary, because some of the things I think, because I kind of break it down, it's the same thing when I'm drawing. Like I did a picture earlier, I could send you over later if you like, but it's like, so I'm sitting drawing this fucking image and it takes like an hour and a half, 2 hours of solid, no sitting, no moving, like 2 hours of fucking sitting there. So my brain's constantly in this fucking thing. And I think that to myself, like, what is the filtering of the idea? You're then producing this physical element, this physical fucking entity in front of you that somebody's going to use, they're going to consume in some way. And when you think about the nature of how society is constructed empirically based on the ideas of others. So our entire house, our clothing, everything is an idea of the other, somebody else, not the other in the sociological term, but another individual. So our ideas, our society, our culture, the vehicle that humans are using to walk through life is constructed on the back of an idea. And if you're looking at like the seasons, how they come and go, blah, blah, human beings, I think we often arrogantly separate ourselves from the natural process, but we're still a product of nature. Therefore, whatever we engage with, I think that's why the idea that I think we could destroy nature is ridiculous.
I agree with that, actually.
I do. Yeah, so that's what I think. I think our ideas are a consequence of, I don't know if it's like an entropic fucking circumstance, but there's certainly something that there's a relationship between the seasons changing, the society being constructed technologically, and our idea process. And that's why I think when people talk about capitalism being bad, but I understand we're at a place most likely now where it needs to be realigned or reevaluated in some form to move forward. But it feels like every form of economic structure that's in place was necessary at the time in order to move forward in the correct proportion. And I think that's where that's like the ideas live in that process.
But this is, and I think I agree with that. And my I guess my pain point comes where at some point we're working off the ideas of other people. So first of all, why can we not express our own ideas, right? I know we can, but you know what I mean? Okay, but that aside, I think there needs to be a self-evaluation process involved, of that idea. That's the thing, is because I mean, you could not undo anything majorly without a catastrophic knock-on effect.
Yeah.
Right. But the idea would be like, I don't know, to identify, okay, that's flawed or it's out of date now or blah 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 blah. I mean, here's one for you, right? Which is a bit of a crazy one. Politicians, right? Very much electorates of a constituent who were traditionally, the one person who could go down to London and voice the concerns of that constituency, right? Now, we've long since surpassed the technology that makes his job redundant. His job is to go down there and tell us what the people want, but we know it doesn't really work like that anymore. But that's what it's supposed to be, right? So we can bypass that and replace politicians with administrators and just have the say ourselves, with civil servants, or maybe even like a kind of jurors thing where they have to rotate. You can't be in that position. Then you're kind of more. Then the system's built towards corruptible individuals, for example. So you don't need to whole sweep of the way everything works in order to do that. And here's another one, right? We've got this rule where we have so many signs of petition. I think it's 100,000, and then Parliament has to bring it forward the thing, right? How bullshit is that, man? When there's like, okay, let's just say 100 people with this rare condition, right? And they need the law changed for this rare condition. Everyone else in society doesn't give a fuck, doesn't affect him anyway, and those 100 people are too really quiet for anyone to notice. Like, do you see what I mean? The system always favors a number of people that is not often representation of the impact of the law that's being questioned. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
And it should, if we had a vote, so imagine every Thursday night at 7 o'clock, your phone pings and you open up an app and it says, here's the 5 things we're voting on this week. And you can go, oh, I'm fucking not interested in that. I'm not voting. Right? The 300 people who do concern, they can vote on it and get it passed. And cannabis would be in that category, right? I think there's so many neutral people. I think there's more neutral people, right? And then you've got those against it, and then you've probably got, I think those against it are probably less than those for it. So those who are neutral don't vote. Those who are against it will vote, and those who are for it will vote there. Do you see what I mean? It just seems like a cleaner way of doing it, because we don't need everybody's involvement in every fucking decision. But we do need the people to decide, which no longer happens. We've got no say in anything. Do you know what I mean? We've got this illusion. They throw us a referendum every once in a while and say, oh yeah, you've got the power of choice. And then, we know how disastrous that can be. Do you know what I mean? In one way or the other. And I just feel that, small increment, we need to remember that we're in an accelerated rate of growth in terms of everything, I think. Technology is driving it, as you say. We're probably again, I'm having fun with the AI stuff because I think it's novel and I think it's really cool because, we've got access to it. At some point it was science fiction. Now it's here and we can actually do things that are fun with it. Right. But beyond that, I mean, the thing that would concern me more is the integration of technology and biological, material, where the, implantation of certain things and accessing the internet through your, that kind of stuff. Interesting from a science point of view, but very scary from as you say, everything's screens. I hate the screens. I've spent far too much time in my life reading off a screen. It's not natural. Reading itself is a really weird physiological thing to do. Mentally it's great, but physiologically reading's weird. You're not designed to look at this fucking, do you know what I mean, up close at this wee tiny piece of, you know what I mean? Your sight is designed to do that for a short amount of time and then that's it done. Not to sit for hours on end as you get caught in a book you can do, right?
That's one of the interesting things about reading that I noticed. I was like that how, going back to that thing we said before about the symbolism behind the images, which can be then after analysed cathartically released through people through psychedelics. If they had issues and that image represents this, blah blah. That's what reading is. Reading is like each single word is a collection of symbols that each represents something that gives the perceiver meaning. And I think that's what's so cool about it. You know what I mean? So every letter is a symbolic representation of meaning. And then you put them all together and it gives you a greater representation of meaning. It's like, what the fuck? So no wonder it's just, I just thought, because I was looking at it when I was reading the book the other day, and also when I'd taken I had this train spotting poster when I was a teenager, and I had the choose life, choose, or the sentence thing, and so it was train spotting with orange down the left and right, and then the entire thing was just all the initial him introducing doing the sentence it does. And every time I take psychedelics and look at it, I'd have to chase the fucking words out of the paper. I'm fucking running about. Where that fuck? Where's that and? Where is it? And it's like, and I was like, what the fuck? And that's one of the things I always thought that was weird. I was like, it's like they were trying to, like, I came to this. There was this one time I remember, because I couldn't articulate what the poster. I was like trying to remember when I was fucking sober, if we call it that. Like, what was this poster about again? Because it was like the poster wasn't allowing me to see the symbols because it didn't want me to know it. I was like, what the fuck? I was like, fuck this, I'm stuffing this joint out. Fuck that. It's fucking bizarre. But so before we go, Gary, the last thing when I'd asked before, like the threats behind sequencing the genome in the context of patents, like what's your thoughts on that?
Oh man, it's quite disgusting. The current state of play is like, if you take something like wheat, for example, where you've got more of a precedence, right? So you can patent a gene for wheat for a specific purpose. So this gene is responsible for keeping this wheat from going bad in the frost, or it keeps it growing during, it's got as an antifreeze property that stops it from, whatever it may be. But you can't then, but if that gene is also useful for grain size, then that's a separate patent, right? So that I guess that is some level of protection. It's the way they got around, or you can't patent a gene. Oh well, can we patent a gene for a purpose? Yes. Right, which I still think is bullshit. Like, if you synthesize a gene from scratch, then you can get credit for, you can patent that, but then good luck trying to put it in an organism because you can't, you're not got permission to do that. So so that was a waste of fucking £5 million. But I think it's a dangerous, imagine just someone goes, oh yeah, I'm going to patent THCA synthase. Anybody who, I mean, well, first of all, how can you enforce it? But like, yeah, it's a scary thing, man. Like, I don't think it's something that we should actively pursue. I think the way that you can prove, like, as I say, you can prove something by biomarker, just by so you read the DNA and you go, oh, this is unique points here that no other plants have, so we know it's that one. Right? It's not marking it, it's not putting a mark on it. It's just that it's just reading something off the DNA sequence. But yeah, I don't think we should be patenting genes. I don't think we should be allowed to do that at all. I don't think we should be allowed to patent any organism in any fashion. You know what I mean? Like, if you wanted to take that a step further, it brings you back to prohibition, right? Like, like there's one. I think someone was telling me recently. There's one company allowed to process cocaine for codeine purposes in America and the States, and after they extract the cocaine, they give all the rest of it to Coca-Cola to make drink. Right, and because it's only that one company that's allowed to do it.
Yeah,
and like things like that they kind of freak me out. So there's this plant that grows naturally this place, but you're only allowed this one company under really strict, and I understand why, because we have controlled substances and blah 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 blah. But I just think it's always a bit strange when you apply it to just an organism almost. You know what I mean? Like cannabis is classic. What was that old one that used to be on the Highland papers? Jail for growing a plant, the gypsy said. And there's a little sketch of the cartoon, the kind of cop and that always stuck in my head as something that is actually quite ridiculous when you simplify, as you say, the complexity of the industry and the legality is like insane. But actually, in the simplest form, that's all it is. It's just someone saying, "No, you can't grow that plant because we say," and that's the justification, because we say. That was the other thing we were bringing. Again, I'm not meant to really talk about this publicly too much, but the toxicity, or the safety limit for CBD is set maybe tenfold below where it needs to be. Do you know what I mean? And it's but then it's misinterpreted as the recommended daily dose. Oh, you shouldn't go over that. And it's like, well, but at that level, it's doing so little.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If you're really needing CBD for a purpose, you need your endocannabinoid system boosted, or your immune system. You need a decent amount, and it needs to be, throughout the day, not just all at once. But again, that subtly, that complexity is lost in a lot of things. And maybe we should keep it for another. Maybe we'll come back on and do another chat. But the other thing I wanted to talk to you about was cannabinoid acids and the story behind how I became convinced that those are the real champion components of the plant. But again, I'd like to go in that one deep, and I think we better not make this as turning into Joe Rogan 3 hours.
An epic fucking marathon sesh. But definitely, Gary, I'll totally. I'm going to take a note of that actually. CBD acids, because one of the things, because I wrote. I'd love to send you one, right? I wrote this. This was my white coat of respect I gave myself, right, for a scientist. So before I started doing the channel, I wrote this. It's all academically referenced in that.
Wow.
And I wrote it it was in 2018, at the beginning of 2018. It took me about 4.5-5 months, and this was at the back of me doing when I was at college. So I was in the zone of like essays and structures, and I'd never done a book before. And I was thinking, well, what is a book? It's a long form essay. It's a discussion. It's like, well, we say that a book, you're in conversation with the author in their absence, essentially. And so I've when I wrote that, one of the things that I found fascinating was when I came across the CBGA, and I was like, how CBGA essentially is the precursor for all. That's what it seems to be, unless I'm mistaken. And that's why I just thought it'd be great for you to talk about that kind of shit, because CBGA seems to be coming to I've got a lot of people on Instagram that putting up like CBGA crystal and CBGA crumble, that's it, and all these different other components, and they seem to be really effective for a really diverse range of medical conditions, and it's all just new. Obviously, we're all just at the beginning here, but I thought CBGA was particularly fascinating because I think, is CBGA also responsible for the level of synthase that will then dictate the phytochemical profile of the plant?
So CBGA is the precursor to THCA, CBDA, and THC, CBD, and CBG. I don't know if I think there's a few others as well. Actually, it might go through, but it's not. I don't think it's all of them.
Right. Okay.
But it is the precursor to the dominant ones that we hear about today.
Right.
There's an interesting theory that me and Kyle were exploring, that was like, if you grow a CBG plant, right, do you see the trichomes change color? Because trichomes changing color is an element of changing from, CBGA, which is the precursor to, THCA or CBD, right? And then finally into the decarboxylated form, which I think I need to check this, Connor, but I think when the trichomes turn amber, that's a sign that there's now a decent amount of THC, because the plant produces THCA, and then either through heat or oxidation or chemical conversion, it turns into THC. But usually when you harvest a plant, you've got very little pure THC and quite a lot of THCA. And then when you burn it in, however you consume it by heating up or whatever, generally you decarboxylate during that process.
Yeah.
But in the plant form, so we're wondering, like, we're exploring the idea right now is that, well, when a CBG plant, you shouldn't see that necessarily, that color change in the trichomes, if that holds up, and that if that's the only things responsible for the coloration, which I don't know at this stage. Like I say, I'm not. We explored the idea just verbally, based on a few observations.
Be interesting if it's just like a membrane thing or something like that, and it wasn't directly responsible. It wasn't actually directly linked. That'd be quite cool if it was just like a foundational membrane that was maybe responsible for these things.
Well, I mean, that was one of there was a paper out at the end of last year, and it was the trichome supercell. I can't remember the name of it actually. I've got a list. I've got a folder full of like those kind of papers, and that's how I label them, as the trichome supercell. What I mean? Like, I just think, oh yeah, I know what that paper is. Do you know what I mean? So that paper was basically showing that there's a finite amount of synthase you can have, because it has to be embedded in the membrane. As you say, the membrane of a certain component of this supercell, which is essentially the trichome. And yeah, there's a bunch of, there's actually interesting that we could go into another time again, but just real quick. Often there's a physiological limitation to the abundance of certain molecules, proteins, enzymes, whatever, and they can be dictated by all sorts of different chemical and physical interactions. But when you've got something membrane bound, it's really interesting, because usually what that means is it's orientated always in the same way. Right. Because there's a way in and a way out for the substrate. Not I mean, it's not always as black and white as this, but as opposed to something that's free flowing, which can be in any direction and it can bind at any point. When it's bound in a membrane, everything else is moving around and then has to come. You see what I mean? It's fixed there.
Yeah.
So you've got a limitation by the size of the membrane, then you've got a limitation of how close those synthases can be to each other, and then you'll have a dominance and then a bunch of other various ones. And collectively that will make up the chemobar. So after the synthases have done their work, there's still other things going on always, in biology. And I mean, I think we said before, and again, this is something else that translates in all scales, I think, is everything's in a state of transition. Nothing is set and settled, nothing at all. And this even the concept in life of, let's go back to the way it used to be. It's a fall. It's you're chasing a fall stream. You can go, let's make a new version of this, try and make a new version of that, but you can never go back. You know what I mean by that? Because again, because that footprint's already there, you can't, you know what I mean? Like, it's, everything's in a different position, and that's both metaphorically and literally, you know what I mean?
Yeah, there's a great quote that pops to mind, actually. I think it's a Buddhist quote, maybe Taoist quote, where it said, like, a man can jump in a river and jump out again, and when he jumps back in the river, he's not the same man, and it's not the same river.
Aye. It's exactly the same. Reminds me, there's a comedy version of that, which is I think it was maybe the Two Ronnies or something that did it, and they get someone, the guy works in a shop and he gets his broom broke. He goes, I've had that broom for 17 years. It had 10 heads and 14 handles. Do you know what I mean?
I love that. That's brilliant. That's perfect. Exactly. It's funny, again, there's no philosophy embedded in fucking humour, but no, that's perfect. I love that a lot. That's good.
Aye.
But no, I mean, let's say I'll let you fucking go, Gary, because I'll talk to you for ages, man. This has been.
I no worries, mate. It's been an absolute pleasure, Con. I'm quite happy to shoot the shit with you anytime you want, actually.
Brilliant.
On camera or otherwise. Nice one, man. Aye, that sounds awesome, man. It's been nice chatting to you. And like I say, man, I'm quite happy to. You should. I meant to actually say I had a bunch of things that I've not got out, but I've got a friend of mine called Lee Anthony, and he's a bit of a shaman for me, and he's quite well versed in not it doesn't come from a science angle like me, but he's quite well versed in these kind of conversations as well. He used to do a podcast called The Life of Lee, which I think he's going to start up again. But I think he'd be a good guest for you as well, because he's just a good person to talk to like this, and he's got some interesting ideas about and some interesting experience. He'd be much more willing to share in front of everybody.
Yeah.
So
send over his details, put us in contact, because like I say, man, I'm always. Sometimes I do think that the viewership, folk will watch what they want to watch, obviously, but sometimes I think I drown people with this stuff because I can't stop. It's like this, like the foundation of life, and you just fucking, you know what I mean? Folk are like, what are you doing tomorrow? Honestly, but never mind that.
No, I love it, man. It's rare we get to have these conversations, man, and I'm really pleased to see you doing what you do and to interact with people in this way. Because it's like it takes balls as well just to go like, oh, right, but what about what about the metaphysical, and what about the kind of the strategic and like it's so refreshing for me to have those conversations.
Likewise, because I'll be honest, Gary, I'm in a bubble. If it was take away the laptop and it's me talking to myself about this stuff, really, literally, I mean, locally, let's say I feel my soul dying when I'm doing these dishes and shit, and because I was doing the same at the other job, and I'm not joking. I feel that Carl Jung's got a great quote when he says, "As a man's intellect increases, his social circle decreases," and that's true, man. And I feel myself in a position where it's like. I leave the house in isolation. That's what it's like. I'm in that social dynamics and the conversation that's present and all these different things, and it's an isolated network. And as I've been building the channel, it's been like a concentrated isolation. And I kept hearing this thing in my head where it's like, it's always as I feel it, it's like that humans are frequency, and you'll be drawn to the frequency of those that share a similar thought process, a thought pattern. And that's what's going on now. And it's peculiar because I think often our dreams or what our intentions for life are destroyed as a consequence of a predetermined time frame that we expect it to arrive, and we have no evidence for why we assume it to arrive in that time. You know what I mean? It's like, like who are we to tell us when this thing's going to show up? but the ideas are actually the thing just whispering to you, like, don't worry, I'm coming. And that's what's going on here. Let's say that's what's happening, because there's nobody, like, I don't have these conversations at these kind of depths with anybody that's in a local position, and it was extremely painful for a long period of time, but I wouldn't change it because it really gave me a lot of insight into a lot of these things.
No, it was kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to leave where I was. Like I was hard to find like-minded people that would push, and I felt the same kind of path as you described happened to me, and the further I went away, the more I became. The more I became myself and started chasing down the things that I wanted to do, and I became pretty competent on guitar pretty quickly. But I still remember certain members of my family, within the first early weeks, my cousin walked in and he's like, "Oh, there's big Gary trying to learn how to play guitar." I heard him saying it to me, and I was just like, "You fucking prick, I'll show you." I started practicing 5 hours a day. I'll show you. It's good motivation,
That's exactly what you have no idea. You take that situation and you flip it around, and instead of guitar, it's a pencil with a bit of paper, and that's me, man, raging. Buzzing like fuck. They're like all these funny jokes and all this comedy shit, and I'm fizzing behind the pen. It's funny as fuck. But that's what it's like, just chasing this thing. And interestingly, what's cool is that there was a couple of times where I've been given, when I was working at this last care home. I'll say this thing for a go, Gary, is that I walked into this care home and I got given this card here. I don't know if you could see it. It's like a little fucking, it's like a religious thing. No, I'm not religious in any way, shape, or form through a demographic or whatever, but you get the point. We share the same similar process. So I'm talking about this kind of stuff to one of the guys that was sitting, and I could see him drifting off, and I'm like, "Nah, man, fucking question stuff and blah blah," and just talking about some stuff. And one of the women came over, and she was like this. She was in her 60s, this Lithuanian woman, and she was like a professional pianist over in Lithuania, and she had to move over through circumstance, and she was friends with like the prime minister over there, and she was a really intellectual woman, found herself in this position that she really shouldn't have been in. And she came over to me, she was like, I'd never spoke to her before. This is the first time she came on. She went, "I hear you, Connor. You are teacher, Connor, right?" And this is like 2-3 years ago, and I'm like, "What?" And she's like, "You are teacher. You are here to teach." And I was like, "All right, cheers, hen." And I was like, and but what I've came to realize, and then like take that, and then there was this other job I was working at, and this one of my friends, this lassie Louisa, she's really sound, it's like kind of gothic. She's really sound, and she went, she'd said to me that one of the other individuals there, this older dude, had said to me, he was like, "Aye, he's not going to be here long. He's a traveller." And now the reason I'm saying this is that I find, because I was like, what? Because he never said, this guy never spoke to me directly, and I was like, that's peculiar. And going back to that thing we said about symbolism, sometimes it feels like we can embody an archetype, and that's what people recognize. And I think that's what's been going on. That sometimes you find yourself in a position where you kind of incorporate the necessary characteristics which define you as that archetype, and if you go against it, you feel like there's a part of you dying. Because personally, if I like, there was times throughout this journey that I've been like, nah, and I'll stop. The thing eats at me. It's not as if I stop doing it. You'll feel it with the music. It will fucking eat you alive if you don't do this. And let's say Jordan Peterson's got this good saying when he says people are like creative people, such as yourself, who's like, people think it's a positive. It's only exclusively positive. He's like, you should see it more as a curse. He says, because if you're creative, you've got to display the creativity in a manner which requires sacrifice and discipline. You've then got to, if you're truly creative, you've then got to tell people what the thing is you're doing because it's new and it's novel. And not only that, you've got to engage with it on the repetition because the creativity's not went away after that first instance.
Yeah,
so it lives with you, and it's just.
And actually, the more creative, what I found was the more creativeness I expressed, the more I had a desire to. That's why I wrote cartoons and we got into animation and we draw this. I mean, amongst other adventures, I mean, like I say, the guy started on, I could just play guitar, and now I do all the instruments and I do all the mixing, and it's just all of those are skills in themselves that people spend lifetimes dedicating themselves towards.
Yeah.
But part of that curse, the same thing, or I don't know if it's maybe more of a learning thing for me, but it feels the same thing to me. Is that once I know how it works, I'm kind of like, okay, let's do the next thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's not entirely like.
I know exactly what you mean, because I mean that book that I've written, a book, The Productive Path, and that's what I've described. I described it as you standardize a unit in your tool set. So the whole thing is you're establishing like an entirety of a tool set, which would be what you can do, all the products. I'm the same. Take away the you can only play music. I could only draw. Now I can do the editing, I can do the voice, I can do the sound. So there's a similar breakdown dynamic there, and that's why I see that is because when I wrote the book, I was thinking that I was like, what is each one of these stages? It's a unit in your tool set, and what you're trying to do is you're trying to establish a unified standard for your entire tool set. You can only do that by incremental steps, and then it gets to this point where people see this unified field of skill or a technique or a product, and it's actually incrementally broken down into separate units. It's really mental.
Aye. And each unit, like I say, can be a lifetime's dedication of work, and we have to try and cover all bases.
Yeah, in like 2 weeks.
Are you still there?
Yeah, broke up there.
That was another thing. The two, I broke up a wee bit there. But I had the two kind of key signature songs of that album was Awaken and Event Horizon. I banged both of them out in a weekend.
Right.
Like the same weekend, and I was just like, I think I've got an album starting here. Do you know what I mean? It was just done. Like, it was just, I had a Friday. And the best it was the Friday night. Then, and I did things on Saturday night, the Saturday during the day. Then it was the Saturday night and a little bit of Sunday during the day. And I think not the finished, polished recordings, but I had the bass, the drums, and the guitars, and the lyrics, so the melodies all worked out. By that stage, I still had to do all this kind of synth stuff and make.
So as you're going through your weekend, as you're going through that weekend, what's the process? Are you just intuitively, you'll picture the stage that you're at of like musically or lyrically, and then you just intuitively like, what should I put here? And you leave the door open, and then it arrives.
So like, once I start chasing something, right, it'll either hit a dead end or it will just keep going.
Right.
And if it keeps going, this is my first filter. If it hits a dead end, it's maybe a cool part. I'll record it on my phone. I'll just leave it. But if it can transition through other parts and it does it freely and it's not just the same old shit that you always do. It's something a wee bit fresh. Like then I'll just keep going. And then at some point, like this is usually I write actually on all different instruments. Sometimes even start from drums, but normally it's guitar I start with. And then so I'll have the guitar part, I'll have the next guitar part, and then the next guitar part. And I'm like, right, so I'll repeat that, and I've got half the song, and then and if it keeps flowing, and then I could go into this part, and then so I'll end up with a bunch of parts that all flow, and then I might edit some of them out, and then I'll see, is any of these particularly good for the chorus or the verse or the bridge, or see what the suitability of the music sounds like. And once you've done that, I mean, during that process though, you're always trying to create the melody. The melody's it's the hook, right? Often the melody's the thing that's going to, attract a listener. So that's always developing in your mind and changing. And there's ghosts in the machine as well, man. Like, see, when you start overdubbing music, you start to hear things coming out that's not there. And then that influences how you see the music. And then you end up adding it in. But it was an artifact, some weird kind of like anomaly that happens, the overlapping frequencies. And, does that coming from? You isolate all the tracks, you can't hear it. You play them all together and it's there.
You said that you went, there's ghosts in the machine. If you look on my LinkedIn, Gary, this is true, man. I actually credit myself with this quote, but it seems like it's no mine. It does, man. It's like, but I wrote on my LinkedIn, because again, it just came to me and I put it into that philosopher's book, that creativity is the spirit that lives inside the machine. Because that's what it feels like. Creativity is the spirit that lives inside the machine. And that's like these, like, because I think music, that's what's so I'd love to talk to you at length about music, but music, I would think, is the most explicit representation of potentially like divine or something. There's something like there's something that, whereas art, you have to have the perceiver. Music is a penetrating force. It's like you're using it's like you're using the ether, you're using the river all around us that we can't see, and you're like directing it in a way that's able to penetrate into their central nervous system. It's
that's a really good description. And now add on to that the fact that it has its own
life.
It has its own direction it wants to go in. So I'm writing all these parts for it, but really it feels like that is the one deciding, no, I know that part, this part, and then that part, no, rearrange that, all that process that's going on in my mind, it feels like it's like, no, that's not right, no, that's not right. Oh, that's it. Oh yeah, I've got it now. Got it now. You know what I mean? I've got it now. Almost like you've got someone looking over your shoulder. And then, but just to fast forward that process, you're constantly thinking about what the melody should be doing, and ghosts in the machine pop up, and you're dealing with all this. And like you said earlier, like I start to get to the point where, shit, I might lose this.
Yeah.
And that vulnerability brings also a sense of like immense what's the word? Adulation, like, just happiness, like when you get to a point where it's safe.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, oh, yes, do you know what I mean? Like, yes, it's there. I just need to do X, Y, Z, and and I'm there.
Yeah.
So that process.
So sorry, Gary, but that's brilliant, because when you're describing that, I said that like the boy's mum, she's doing this fucking fashion thing, trying to get in the zone, all that kind of bullshit. And I was trying to tell her, like, listen, your thought process on the craft itself, your thinking as you chipping away, and that's what it's supposed to be. You're already forming it. I was like, you should think of every idea, like, I want to just say, obviously in your case, I want to do an album, I want to do a movie, I want to do whatever the fuck. I was like, you should think about it. The way I see it is, it already lives out there in its full form. The thing that you're picturing, it already lives out in the world in the full form. What you have to do is access it through incremental thought processes and daily action. And a good example is Leonardo da Vinci, when he had, no, it wasn't, it was Michelangelo, the guy that did Statue of David, where he had this thing where he showed, there was a big massive fucking rock of stone, and he would show up for 4 months, and he'd just walk up and look at this fucking stone and then fuck off him. And there was a guy nearby that kept saying to him, like, what are you, like, on week 2 or fucking day 3 or whatever, he was like, what are you doing? And he was like, I'm working. And he just would show up, and he would just have his fucking, not even his notepad, he would just show up and stare at this fucking this big block of fucking stone. So then you fast forward to, he's completely made the Statue of David. It's touring the world or whatever the fuck, everybody's popular looking at it, and they asked him, how did you come up with it? He went, I didn't come up with it. He says, it was already in there. I just got rid of the rough edges. And, and that's how I picture our thought process. Our thought process is equivalent to him chipping away each stone. And depending on your idea will depend on what it is your Statue of David's going to look like. But each thought, I'll use that, no, I won't, blah, blah. Each thing that we think's like important to the craft is actually a crucial fine-tuning of the inevitable statue, if you follow the metaphor.
Aye, that's brilliant, man. Aye, I didn't know that story. That's amazing. But that's exactly how. And again, just to re-hit that point, I think we've both stumbled upon a kind of universal process, method, understanding.
It feels like area. It feels like there's a location, man.
But that's why I'm saying that makes me confident that what our art is at least it's honest.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's an honest endeavor, pursued for the best of intentions.
Yeah.
And usually that, maybe not straight away, but usually that does create something worthy of other people's attention.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? At least it's honest. You can hold your hands up and say, right, listen, you know, there's no, yeah, you might not like it. You might find it okay. You might find it great. It doesn't matter. You know, it's honest, and then therefore it's validated. Because I mean, we spoke about this really briefly about how does an artist, you know, get validation. It's like everyone's got different. For Jay-Z needs to sell X amount of million albums. For me, I need 3 people to reach out and go, by the way, that really meant something to you. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just different. But that, as long as you get that validation, I think 2 things can happen. Either the validation spurs you on to get more, or the lack of validation spurs you on to reach that first initial, you know. But I think that, you know, and you clearly have this element, and it's something I always hold at the front of my mind, is just like, don't get carried away with your own bullshit. Don't get over excited about your own abilities, because, you know, as we both, you know, said, there is an element that can go away by us stopping engaging in it. Do you know what I mean? So never take it for granted. Never think you've achieved, you know, you're the bee's knees at that or this because, you know, because you're doing it. Just be
grateful,
quietly showing up every day, and, you know, as you say, chipping away, and that's how you get. I believe that's how you'll get to where we all want to be.
It's funny, the thing that popped in mind there, Gary, was like, there's the thought process that's required. In my mind, I'm like, yeah, I'm the same as you. Is like, when it comes to your artistic endeavor, when you're engaged in the craft, be grateful, but also just see it as you're only renting the space. That's what it's like.
Aye, exactly.
You know what I mean? You didn't own it. You're just renting the space, man. Somebody else is going to follow you, and somebody there before you, man. You're just renting the fucking space.
Absolutely, man.
But yeah, got it. It's been a fucking pleasure. Let me know, like, you let me know when you're next free. I'm always fucking 6 o'clock every night. I'm available, so you just let me know in the next couple of weeks or so whenever you want another chat, because this is fucking dynamite, man.
I mean, I'm happy to do it. It's yeah, like I say, even a kind of like off camera one, or even an in person one would be even better, you know.
100, but to be honest, you probably need to take a couple of days off your work, man.
Aye.
Like, definitely, because honestly, that would be fucking dynamite. I really hope to see you if I get down to Coventry. I really hope I do. That'd be brilliant if you were to be at Product Earth, or you were to see one of the, like, I'd love you to see the screening of the movie, because
no, definitely, man. Tell me where it is, and I'll make sure I go. That, you know,
excellent.
The missus pregnant, so we're due our first kid in June. So that might put a spanner in the works for any plans. But
it'll probably be August. Do you know what you're having?
A boy. Yeah,
oh, good boy, man! High five!
I'm so excited, man. It's really excited.
It's something else, like. It's something else, man. It's like transitional shit. I'm telling you. I've got my son. He's 9 in March, so he's 8 now. And man, it's. You've already done a lot of work that I think a lot of dads do as a consequence of having a kid. That's what it sounds like already. Your mentality seems to be in a position where inevitably you're just going to go a lot further down that pathway. But a lot of guys, I think, having a kid opens them up to this form of stuff. Just as it's like kind of paradigm shifting, and you inevitably have to. I'll be honest, for the first couple of years of Jaden's life, I was fearful of my own. Like, I have to stay alive. I've
had those thoughts as well.
Yeah, it's like, nothing can happen to me. This guy needs me, man. You know, that's what I felt like. But fortunately, that's kind of faded now, and it's kind of put me into a position where it's been more focused on, like, my whole thing. The validation for me, because that's what I said. The bar was that. I want all of this stuff to be able to pay for a house that he can have. That's what this is. So that he has a building. Because I remember my mum's a fucking alky, so she got rid of it. We were like a few years away from having the mortgage paid, but there's nothing available at all for us, our entire family. And so in my mind, I was like, the bare minimum I should be able to do with all of this is to have a house bought for him. So I think that's why in my mind, like, when I spoke to Simpa, I went on Simpa's podcast, and he was like, you're not really proud of yourself. And I was like, I don't feel pride whatsoever. I feel self-respect that I've maintained the craft. I feel respectful of myself that I've done the discipline. But there's no pride. First off, it's inflated. But also, I've not met the minimum of, like, there's no house bought. Like, fuck, he said you'd buy a house. Fuck, how's there no, even a shed, bro? Fuck's sake.
Like I said, it took me a while to figure out what I wanted from my music. Do you know what I mean? Like, but because I actually when I was professional, one thing I kind of played it down a little bit, but when I was professional, it was killing my desire to be a musician, because I was up on stage playing Robbie Williams songs, and, like, you know, I was like, I don't know why I fucking be here, man. You know, it was fun, but it was just like, you know, it was a bunch of, like, randy, you know, women out for the night out, and you know, they'll ask for all these songs that you just don't want to be listening to, never mind playing. And just standing on stage, just having the realization that this is going to kill my love for music. You know, this is not why I picked up the guitar. This is not why you know, what I realized was I do music to express myself and to keep my sanity. You know, especially, like, it correlates. The more pressure I'm under with, like, work, especially research and intellectual stuff, the more creative I have to become. It's like a counterbalance.
Yeah.
You know, like when my work's kind of quiet and stuff, I tend to not be as busy. I tend not to be as productive musically as well, which is weird because it always frustrates me. Like, why, man? I've got time to do it, but I'm not doing it. It's really a function of that other element, which is, again, another conversation maybe for another day. But
definitely.
Let's do it, Connor. I'll reach out to you. Probably not before I go away now, but I'm only away for a week. So once I'm back from there, I'll give you a shout. But we exchange WhatsApp numbers or whatever.
That's what I was thinking, man. Definitely, because it'll be handy. Because let's say, it's like, man, these things are. It's good to have those kind of fucking everyday conversations when they arrive in your mind. You know, it's really cathartic. You know,
exactly. Because then we can just shoot a message. I had this idea. Are you available tonight? And I'm like, I've got an hour, or whatever. You know.
That kind of thing, just phone you on WhatsApp, that kind of shit. Because interestingly, just before you go, when you mentioned about the relative corporatization of you being a musician, if you were to describe it that way, that's one of the fears I have in my mind, because I also have this dynamic where I feel like the animation is going to be kind of taken in a sense and trying to be corporatized and put through that thing. And I'm in a position where I'm like, I don't know, it's just that it'd be good to talk to you about that kind of thing, because Kyle's good with that, because Kyle's level of music, as I'm sure you're aware, he was the guy, man, and he was describing to me about certain things, and I think he's, let's say, I've spoken to Kyle a lot, he's fucking dynamite, man, and that's what I think. I just have a fear of that. I always want to have my soul intact, but inevitably I don't want to be a position where I'm creating the craft in alignment with washing fucking dishes, man.
I know, mate. Listen, you know, I'm a few years older than you, but the different career paths, obviously, and stuff. But you know, there was times I was paying my dues, and I was just thinking, "This is fun. I've paid enough dues, man." You know what I mean? It's time to get something back. You know, but don't underestimate the importance of that counter side of your life, because because it drives you more to do the things you want to do. Once that goes away, you'll have a burst of productivity. But when it starts to come down to basal levels, then depending on where you are, will depend on how, you know, I don't know, maybe not, but I found that those extra little pressures are actually sometimes, again, it's like, you know, some people think it's genius, some people think it's curse, depending on how you approach it. You know, they can try and turn it into something positive. It's like, well, I know I don't want to be doing this, so I'm going to try even harder at the things I do like in order to get rid of this element of my life, you know.
Yeah, because you see it through other musicians where they're like independently owned and they're making a statement, and that's how I envision the CANNAMAN thing. I want it to be that, like, my whole thing for that, because you know what it's like, it's kind of quiet in Scotland when it comes to cannabis stuff, and I want CANNAMAN not to just because I'm going to the cannabis Scottish Cannabis Consortium thing at the end of Edinburgh, this event, and I'm going to record it, like speeches and all that kind of shit, and my intention is to just kind of expand on this, and I really want this to be one of those things where in the very near future, like, there's a staff of people and this is all just a machine, you know what I mean? And it's just it's orchestrated through my fucking hand, because I
was going to say there's ways of doing that nowadays where you can keep complete creative control, but just spread the kind of heavy lifting a little bit.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And there's actually like some surprising company, like Netflix, for example, has been surprisingly supportive of those types of processes, I hear. Do you know what I mean? And some of these modern platforms are way more fluid than the kind of traditional TV stuff, you know.
Yeah.
So they definitely, man, just keep, you know, stick to your guns. Keep doing what you just keep doing it. You don't need my advice. Do you know what I mean? But
it's fucking helpful. You have no idea, man. You have no idea how helpful it is to hear it though, because it's all me. Like, I project this shit, and then what happens is I switch it. I take the laptop off, or I go into Drawn, and all I can hear is me echoing in my head.
Aye, we've all got that as well. Shut up, would you?
So when I can hear it for you, when it's your voice, or when I can hear it as somebody else's voice, it's like, all right, it's no me self-confirmation. It's external, like.
No. It's I mean, it's as much as I can pick it up over Zoom and stuff. There's clearly a path that you're walking. That's, you know, that's there. It just, you know, my advice is just keep walking that path. You're on the right way. Do you know what I mean? And you do know it. You sometimes just you quaver in the comfort of knowing it. You know what I mean? But you do know it. You do know it.
I appreciate you a lot, Gary. Honestly, man.
Same, man. Same. It's been a pleasure. And maybe we'll wrap it up there and we'll catch it up again in a week or so.
Definitely, man. And let's see, have a fucking dynamite time away in the Caribbean, you absolute dick. I'm over here, it's raining.
I probably will, to be honest with you.
Thanks to Gary for giving me his time, and thanks to you for sticking around until the end of the video. I sincerely hope you enjoyed the content. I'll see you next time.